Good morning, members, and a warm welcome to our guests, and I'll return to you in a moment once I've formally opened the meeting. And welcome to everyone watching us and to those few who will be with us in the gallery today. Welcome to this London Assembly plenary. And the topic for today's investigation is the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. Let's start with apologies for absence.
We have apology chair from Assemblymember Duval, Assemblymember Dismore, Assemblymember Hall and Assemblymember Gavron.
Thank you for that. And just a few announcements, primarily about the work of the Assembly. The Regeneration Committee looked at the delivery of the Cultural Infrastructure Plan and the GLA spend on culture and creative industries. The Environment Committee examined the level of tube dust on the underground and the impact it is having on public health. And we examined the Mayor's annual equality report. The Assembly's Police and Crime Committee met with the Met Police and Deputy Mayor about the level of crime in London. We produced our annual report, which is hot on the off the press and in front of you members today. I think we meet on, do we meet on our 19th birthday, or was that yesterday? That was yesterday. So, recommended reading. And members will know, and I thank those who were present, that we took part in the Armed Forces flag raising in honour of our servicemen. So let's then move to item 2, Declaration of Interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? In addition, do members have any other declarations to make which are relevant to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Okay, right. And just a reminder to turn all your gizmos to silent. Then let's move to item 3. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 6th June 2019? And can I sign them as a correct record? Agreed? Thank you. Now, Section 4, we come to the Q&A session on the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. With us today, we have, and we welcome Liz Pearce, CBE. Thank you for joining us, Liz. And Liz is the chair of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. And you're joined by somebody we know well, but we welcome you, David. We welcome you. I didn't say anyway, that was the deputy. We welcome you, David, and Mr. Lunts, in your role as Interim Chief Executive Officer of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. Just to say, for this meeting, the structure is that there are 3 lead-off questions, and then Assembly members will ask supplementary questions after each question has been answered. But before we go to the lead-off questions, I'm happy to receive a short opening statement from the chair of the OPCD.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the invitation to attend your plenary today. I think it's been a full year since we were last here, and quite a lot has happened in that year. Our vision for Old Oak and Park Royal remains hugely ambitious. So ambitious that, there are times when I sort of almost wake up in the middle of the night and think, my goodness, how are we actually going to deliver this? Because I think we have to accept that this is a very large, very challenging site. But the prize ultimately is at least 25,000 homes and 65,000 new jobs around a very significant transport interchange where HS2 will actually meet Crossrail. Now, over the last year, we have made some very significant progress, not least nailing our £250 million HIF allocation. I say nailing it, and we can talk further about the further steps that have to be gone through to actually make sure the money ends up in the bank. It's not quite as simple as it sounds. We've also published our draft local plan, and we're in the midst of an examination in public on that. We have a further session with the inspector on the 18th of July. We've started some very welcome early works projects in Park Royal, and we've also won good growth funding from the GLA to do some sort of early activation improvements around the site. I have also refreshed the board membership, because our board members who joined when we were first set up reached the end of their 3-year tour, and it is GLA rules that we have to reappoint following an open competition. So we have a significantly different board, and I'm very happy to expand on that and the people on the board. One other very significant thing that's happened to us, Victoria Hills stepped down as chief executive. We appointed Mick Mulhern, who had been our director of planning, as an interim chief executive. He was lured back to the delights of Dublin, decided to go back to his home country. And also Doug Wilson, our chief operating officer, has decided to retire, and on the way to that retirement has reduced his hours. And I'm delighted to say I was able to persuade David Lunts, who you all know very well, to join us as our interim chief executive, initially on the basis of 2 days a week. I'm delighted to say that David is enjoying himself so much that he has now agreed to join us for 4 days a week, so is effectively a full-time chief executive, because I know how hard David works, so 4 days a week means an awful lot of his input and effort. He is retaining 1 day a week interest in his work in the Housing and Land Division, is that the right term? In GLA, but I think that's hugely good news for us. David has also moved swiftly over the last 4 to 6 weeks to strengthen the executive team, and he would be happy to say more about that. I think it's worth saying that we do still have a number of challenges, and I've no doubt this will come out as you put your questions to us. The first one, as I mentioned, is we do have to get the money delivered from the HIF. The way this is done, it is an MHCLG grant. It is administered by Homes England, and they set a number of conditions which we have to meet. And we're engaged in a very close and, I'm glad to say, constructive dialogue with Homes England to try and ensure that we can meet those conditions and we can actually get the money in the bank. In the meantime, I'm very pleased to say that the Mayor has agreed that he will provide us some interim funding until that fund actually arrives. I can't talk about the details of that because we're awaiting a mayoral direction on that. But the principle is very clear. I'd met the Mayor some time ago. I said we would need this interim funding from him. He said, when you're ready, come back to me. We went back to him and his finance people, and we're having a very constructive negotiation about that interim money. So HIF, it's not nailed yet, but we are making good progress. Our EIP is challenging because some of the objections that have been raised by a well-known landowner in the area, but we are working through that assiduously. We think we now have good information and evidence to bring back to the inspector for his further hearing on the 18th of July, and we hope that will continue to make progress. Assuming we get HIF, we get the EIP, we will still have the challenges of site assembly, and this is not going to be a straightforward site. But large regeneration projects like this aren't. Even the Olympics was not straightforward. I'm satisfied now we have got a good team in place that will be able to deal with this once we get HIF and EIP settled. I think the biggest elephant in the room, and my last point, is that there is still a degree of uncertainty around HS2, which I think is very unfortunate for us. I personally believe strongly in the project. I tell everybody I'm convinced it will go ahead, but it's not for me to decide. This is a national government matter, and I think the sooner we have some clarity on the future of HS2, given some of the comments that have been made by potential leaders or potential prime ministers, the better that will be for us. So Obviously, all of what I've talked about is going to be the subject of your questions to us in the next couple of hours, so I'll stop there, but I hope it gives you a flavour of what we've achieved, what we have to achieve, and ultimately I hope you're getting the right impression that I am confident we have a project that we can deliver. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that update. And then let's go then to the first lead-off question, and that's in the name of Assembly Member Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. The question touches upon the governance and leadership issue. You mentioned the situation with the Chief Executive. Can I ask David, who is currently the Interim Chief Exec, what will be the main priorities, you reckon, of the incoming Chief Executive?
Thank you very much for the question. So I think very much building on what Liz has said in her introductory remarks, we have, or I've come into an organisation that spent a considerable amount of time preparing the ground to see regeneration happen in the area. The focus has been very much on establishing the OPDC, very much on trying to create the planning framework to enable development to happen, and also, of course, crucially preparing the ground to try and secure some funding in order to actually bring land and infrastructure forward. So now that we are in the final stages of the planning process, because the final hearing for the planning inspector to review our draft local plan is on the 18th of July, we are confident that we will have a local plan adopted in the next few months. That then gives us the basis for moving ahead with a programme of drawing down the HIF funding, the £250 million that Liz has already mentioned. Secondly, it then gives us the basis to really begin the process of land acquisition, which is going to be very important for our first phase development. And thirdly, it also gives us the basis to start to deliver some early sites and the infrastructure that's necessary to develop those sites. And that primarily is about opening up a major new access road through the north end of Old Oak, which is necessary in order to secure development. And secondly, to provide the energy and utilities infrastructure, which currently is not there at the capacity we need to bring new homes and new employment to the area. What does that mean in terms of a chief executive's priorities? It's very much to ensure that we have the capability within the team to, if you like, move from planning and strategy into delivery. And that's why, again, as Liz mentioned in her opening remarks, in the last couple of months we've moved to strengthen the senior team. So we've recruited recently a Director of Land and Property who's got a lot of experience and is very able. We've also brought in a Director of Development from the commercial sector, who again has got a lot of very useful senior level experience. And I've also supplemented the team with two senior consultants who have got a very long senior track record at delivering comprehensive regeneration projects. So I think the senior team now is poised to undertake those priority areas of work that I've mentioned. The second thing now, and this is very important, is that we also need to have a very serious engagement outside of the OPDC with a range of organisations. And it's quite a comprehensive and complicated picture, but there are some key agencies that we need to work very closely with. That includes Network Rail, who are the major landowner for our early phase development, and we've got very good relationships, I'm pleased to say, at a senior level with Network Rail. Secondly, obviously Homes England and MHCLG and the government, in order to address the conditions around the HIF funding and make sure that we're in a position to satisfy those conditions and move to contract in the next few months. Thirdly, we have an ongoing dialogue, a very detailed dialogue now with all of the landowners and local interests in the area that we're looking to develop in our first phase. So we issued formal letters explaining our plans 3 or 4 weeks ago, and there's a very busy process of engagement. And then, I guess, lastly, but by no means least, a wider discussion involving the 3 boroughs that we cover and the communities that they represent. So there's a very busy programme of community engagement. So if I was going to summarise it, I would say there's a very important delivery job around land assembly, around infrastructure and early development, which is very much the business of the strengthened senior team. There's an ongoing process of dialogue with community interests and local businesses. And then thirdly, there's this big external piece with strategic stakeholders, including government. And those really are the priorities over the next period.
In 2 seconds, can you tell me when do you expect the new chief exec to be in post?
Perhaps I could chip in here, because we actually decided, once we'd lured David to come and work for us, and once we'd persuaded him that, and he indeed had persuaded the GLA that he could spend 4 days a week, that we have paused the recruitment of a permanent chief executive, because David, first of all, is doing an excellent job, has all the contacts we need, knows the background, knows the subject area well, and of course has tremendous expertise in the whole housing agenda. But also, I think it is quite difficult to go out to the market for a chief executive when you still have a number of uncertainties that you need to nail. We need to get our local plan adopted. We need to get the HIF money in the bank. We need to get started on the land acquisition process. So I've agreed with the GLA that we would suspend the permanent chief executive recruitment, and David is with us for the foreseeable future. We haven't put a specific time frame on that, but I was expecting, we talked about at least 6 months.
Thank you. I'd leave it at that, though it does pose a number of other questions which I'll take up outside this meeting. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're still on governance and leadership at the OPCD, and I see Assemblymember Pigeon, Assemblymember Bailey, Assemblymember Cooper. Okay, no, we're still with governance and leadership.
Speak up.
Stakeholder engagement, genuine stakeholder engagement must surely be the key one. But the Old Oak Neighbourhood Forum has told us that you have failed to listen and genuinely engage with the community. So maybe, David, why have you not adopted all the recommendations from the May 2016 review of OPDC, which included setting up regular forums outside the board?
I'll just deal with half of that and then hand over to David, because I'm very aware of some of the comments from the Old Open Neighbourhood Forum, which I would have to say I feel are misleading. At board level, when we refreshed the board, and this was a process we had
I'm not asking about the board, I specifically asked about setting up regular forums outside the board.
Well, no, this is relevant, because what I want to do with the board is ensure that the people we've brought onto the board have a method for engaging or observing, listening, being part of the consultation within the neighbourhoods, within both the neighbourhood forum, but the neighbourhood forum is a very sort of specific area. I want to ensure that we're actually reaching all the different groups that represent people, interests, particular sort of things.
So how are you doing that? What have you done to set up?
What we are actually trying to do, we haven't completed it yet because it's work in progress. I have asked the team, or the team has already been out to the Grand Union Alliance to explore with them whether they are the forum that would actually bring together all the different groups we wish to liaise with. We have offered to put resource into the Grand Union Alliance, not because we want to dictate their agenda, but simply to enable them to function as a coming together of all the different interests within the area. And, there are, I can't remember the actual number, but there's at least sort of 15, 16 different local amenity type groups, and I want to hear from all of them. The Grand Union Alliance have gone away to think about that, but if we could actually give them some resource that enabled them to organise themselves so that we would have a way of interacting. I've then got two or three of the board members I would detail to actually be that interface and listen to what the representative forum is saying. So that's my plan for how to manage the community engagement. Quite separately, we will of course listen to and talk to the neighbourhood forum and the Old Oak Neighbourhood Forum, We have actually funded them already to hire a consultant to help them prepare their plan. It was difficult engaging with them initially because they had some issues around their own organisation and putting forward people that could engage with us. But I would strongly contest any suggestion that we have failed to engage with these people.
Okay. I want to move on to another question. I have limited time, but the wording you use is manage community engagement. I think you might want to reflect on the language you use, because if I was the community, I wouldn't want to feel that I was being managed. And I think
I'm managing a process to enable the community to engage properly. I'm not trying to manage a community. I think
you said manage community engagement. They were your words.
Well, I'm managing a process.
If I could move on. 4 years ago, the previous mayor talked about the area being transformed into one of the London's most exciting areas to live, work and play. Your website says you're developing a whole new centre and community for West London. Is this really true? Isn't the reality that most of the new developments to reach construction to date have been granted by the London Borough of Ealing and not OPDC? And I really want you to explain, we've got just over a minute, has OPDC delivered anything that the boroughs couldn't have alone?
Do you want to go at that first?
Well, I think the facts are that there's something like 3,500 homes that have been granted planning consent since OPDC was established in 2015. I think the majority of those planning applications have been determined by OPDC. But it is the case, of course, that Ealing have also, because OPDC has delegated back to Ealing responsibility in their patch, they too have consented quite a number of homes. So I think there's been a fair amount of activity. Oakland South, which is a major new development by Notting Hill Genesis, is going to be complete next year, and that's a very exciting mixed scheme with new commercial space as well as a lot of affordable housing. There's also all the development that's going on the old Diageo site. So there's a lot of activity there. There's a lot of planning consents been granted on Scrubs Lane on the eastern end of our site, and we're confident that we can bring many hundreds of new homes forward there. In terms of the question about what has OPDC been able to do that perhaps the boroughs wouldn't have been able to do alone, I think the main thing I would point to really is the HIF money. I think without a development agency sitting at the heart of the project, it would have been extremely difficult to have convinced government to have accepted or indeed processed the 250 million from the Housing Infrastructure Fund. Bearing in mind that, you know, the money that has been secured in principle through that route is at the maximum ceiling level that government is able to allocate through HIF. So I think that's a reflection of the confidence that Homes England and MHCLG have got in the arrangements. And I think it would have been very difficult to have secured that in the event that it was without some sort of agency representing those three boroughs.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Morning, David. Given that significant area within the OPDC site is strategic industrial locations, how will you be affected by the Mayor's new London plan policy of no net loss of strategic industrial locations? How will it affect your delivery?
I think if you look at our long-term objectives, we're not just about building homes. So even though the core of the site will be residential, there is still provision within our local plan and indeed within our master planning for significant commercial space, 65,000 jobs worth of commercial space. We're also looking at how we can intensify the availability of strategic industrial land in Park Royal. I mean, that was one of the reasons for having Park Royal within the boundary of the Mayoral Development Corporation, that we can achieve a degree of trade-off. If a big chunk of land goes out of sill in the core of the Old Oak bit, we can expand the amount of sill, or the amount of sill floor space, if not the actual acreage, in Park Royal and around the periphery of Park Royal. And personally, I've always strongly believed that if you're building new districts and new communities, it shouldn't be about just homes. It's actually got to be about jobs, because you want to build a complete community, and that remains our ambition. And I'm confident, that is the direction that we will continue to go in and continue to implement.
I agree with you, Director. It sounds correct. You don't just want to build an oasis of homes and have nowhere to work. But are you confident that you can deliver 25,000 homes with no net loss? Because, of course, we've been promised 25,000.
I think at this stage I would say I believe we can over the period of the plan. I'm absolutely sure we will. I mean, part of the way in which that industrial land has sort of developed and grown up over the years, it's a big, low, flat land use. You know, it's lots of single-storey sheds and stuff. And I think when we look at, if we look at our plans for how we want to introduce new types of units, how we want to introduce new types of business, how we're working with lots of the neighbours, we're working with Imperial College West to look at how we can sort of encourage spin-out businesses. We're working with the Park Royal community to look at how that can expand. I think it would be an admission of failure if I said at this stage I am not confident that I can do it. I think we have to have the confidence that we will.
So how are you going to achieve it? Is it already in your plans to achieve the 25,000 homes? And the save, I can't see how this is going to be done. It's nice to say you can do it and you want to do it, but how are you actually going to do it?
Well, I'll defer to David on the technicalities of this, and this might be something we have to write you on, but I'm not sure whether we have to do it foot by foot or acre by acre or job by job. And 65,000 jobs sounds pretty impressive to me, sort of in terms of what we're actually going to be creating. Can you help me on this one?
Well, bear in mind that, our area, our patch, if you like, has been designated as an opportunity area for a considerable period of time. It spans more than one mayoralty. And that opportunity area planning framework has set out at a strategic level how land should be released for residential and mixed-use development. But you're right, we don't want to see any net loss of jobs and employment. In fact, we want to see more, which is why we have this long-term goal of achieving 65,000 jobs. But as Liz has pointed out, it would be wrong to imagine that the Development Corporation's patch is just about Old Oak and, if you like, the land that's going to come forward largely for housing development. It's also very much about Park Royal. It's about nurturing those businesses. It's about intensifying use. We're looking very actively at the moment to develop some pilots for looking at sort of vertical stacking of industrial development so that we can make more intense use of what otherwise are quite low density sites. So I think what we'll find is we'll see a mix of intensified existing uses, we'll see new residential development, and we will see a lot of commercial development, particularly perhaps around the new HS2 station, which, as we know, once it's there, is going to be a piece of transport station infrastructure which is going to be busier and larger than Waterloo Station. So this has tremendous capability and potential to generate new jobs at a denser level, frankly, than the kind of employment profile that we have on the site at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Good morning. I want to talk about community engagement. The OPCT has launched a community review group to reflect local interest when deciding planning outcomes in the area. However, there are no details on the london.gov.uk website, which shows who's on the membership of this, when do they meet, what the minutes are. So why is this the case? Why isn't this all published?
About strategy.
What?
Sorry.
Yeah.
No.
I wasn't aware that it wasn't published. There's nothing secret about the community review group.
Nope.
And if it's not being published, that must be an administrative oversight.
Okay, so if you can publish on the london.gov site, because that's the site where the OPCD site sits, right?
Yeah, yes.
So we can access it easily, because I was trying to get a hold of who the membership was of the review panel.
Well, we've certainly published the membership of the review panel because I remember seeing the press release about it.
Well,
but,
let's see who the members are. I want to know who the members are.
Take that away.
How often they meet, what do they discuss, what are the things.
Yep,
okay.
No
Thank you. So
nothing secret about that
great.
at all.
Thank you very much. And the other thing is that I understand that the community review discussions are turned into a formal report that feed into the decisions of the OPCD and the OPCDC Planning Committee. Will you publish a report, right? What has been the impact of this impact of those discussions by the community review group?
There is we've undertaken to have an annual review of the group's activities, and I'm very happy to say that once that annual review is concluded, we can publish that review, or at least a summary of that review. Because
when do you think it will be published?
When
we
published.
so we concluded rather?
I'm not quite sure when it was created.
It was only set up about three months ago. So if we're committed to this annual report, it'll be in about 9 months plus a bit
Probably
to
next
actually
spring.
do it. Yes, so next spring.
Okay. And the board, right, just to come back to the board, are you able to give us more detail as to how the board was selected? Commit to putting a full list of who's on the board with details of their backgrounds and also the community connections, right?
Yes. Sorry, I think, did you say you'd like to know how the board was selected?
How selected and what their community connections are.
Right.
Because I understand that the local community feels that only 2 members of the board, right, may have connections with the community, although your material says that everyone is living in the OPCD area. And I really want to establish, right, are there genuine connections with the community? Is the community being given representation?
So what we wanted to do when, as I say, a large number of our original board members had to step down because of the rules, we ran a competition. We made it clear that we were looking for a broad range of interests. Included in that was people who had local connections, local knowledge, who could feel the area, could really understand it, both from a business and a residential perspective. But we also wanted people who had a broad range of expertise in the whole sort of business of how you do engagement with communities, also how local businesses run. And what we ended up with after the selection process, we had quite a large field to choose from. We had a very rigorous selection process which included myself, David Bellamy, Jules Pipe and an independent assessor sitting on the board. We went through the usual long list, short list. We ended up with a group of people that we felt married up local connections. One of them lives actually in the area. One of them used to live in the area and is actually an expert in the whole sort of theory of community engagement. One is a business expert.
That's
and
great.
Another one.
Will you please publish this? Will you publish who the members are?
Well, the members are indeed
And also
on the website,
some who have a little bit of background, right, of what the members represent.
I was under the impression their
Well,
backgrounds were, but if they're not, I'm happy to write to you with a full explanation.
And put it on the website.
And we will make sure it's on the website if
you.
it's not already. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Assemblymember Cooper, governance covers strategic planning, anything that you wish to raise. Do you want to come in and ask a question?
I want to ask a question, but not on governance, on apprenticeships and other areas.
Well, I'll take your question.
Thank you. I wondered if you could set out how many apprenticeships have been started as a result of OPDC's work up to date, and how diverse are they in terms of the people who have gone into them?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of the question.
How diverse?
How diverse are the people who've gone into them? Apprenticeships have tended to be dominated by, traditional groups.
Yeah.
It would be nice to think that in this modern day and age of equality that we're managing to get, people from a wide range of backgrounds, more women, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I know I've got we have certainly created a number of apprentices, and I'm just struggling to find the number because I asked for that information, and I know that we have created a number as a consequence of our planning work. Forgive me, it might take
Okay,
me...
well, maybe you can send
I
me
can
that
drop you a line with that.
number
What I haven't got
afterwards.
to hand is the detailed sort of profile of that cohort, but I can
That would
certainly
be
retrieve
good.
that for you.
And how are you working? How are you linking that in with the mayor's strategic aims in his skills strategy for the overall OPDC area? Because obviously you've got a number of different areas that you're working on. Obviously not just planning, construction. It's quite diverse, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's right, and we're doing a lot of work with the Park Royal business community on this. So we're looking to establish a new employment and skills hub in Park Royal.
I was going to ask you about that. So you're saying it's not quite yet set up still?
That's right, it's not, but it is well underway, and I mean, the idea is obviously to, do a number of things, not only to support new entrants and apprenticeships, but also to, support and sustain new businesses in Park Royal and West London, to provide business advice, and generally focus as well very much on linking in with the work that the Mayor's doing around construction skills with his Construction Skills Academy. So I've just found the number of apprentices, by the way. I knew I'd get there in the end. It's 71 at the moment.
71.
We've achieved a minimum of 71 through the Section 106 agreements that we've completed since 2015.
Perhaps you could give us the diversity breakdown of them. I am happy to receive that afterwards.
Yep, I'm very happy
if
to look
that's
for that.
more.
Yep.
And so you're still not quite there with the Skills Hub, with having it going live. But so what work has gone into it so far? You're talking about working with others, which is great. And when do you think that is going to be up and running?
So the target date for that at the moment is next spring. Spring 2020, yeah. And as you may know, this is a partnership between OPDC, London Borough of Brent, Ealing, Hammersmith and Fulham. We're working closely as well with DWP and West London College. So we've got a site, it's going to be near the Park Royal Centre, and as I've already explained, it will cover a range of issues, particular focus on construction, because obviously we hope to be able to influence that as we bring forward our development sites and infrastructure, but also very much linking into the existing business infrastructure within Park Royal and wider West London.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Bacon.
How would you describe the relations between the OPDC leadership and Car Giant?
And
Car Giant. Interesting.
Probably less positive than they were a year ago, I think, is the honest assessment. I mean, that's a fairly well-known fact, I think. Certainly a year ago, Car Giant, as colleagues may be aware, were actively thinking about bringing their main site forward for development. Their view on that has changed, and that's a matter of public record, I think, now. We are still in touch with Car Giant. They are at the moment reserving their position in terms of formal engagement, because they clearly are raising objections to the draft local plan, which is currently going through its EIP process. But there have been communications recently, including invitations to OPDC's board to visit. There was a visit that we were involved in through the Car Giant site at their invitation with the planning inspector last month. But I think it's fair to say that Car Giant and the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation are not entirely aligned at the moment in terms of our planning and regeneration objectives.
The visit that you referred to, or the invitation for a visit, and I understand the presentation, to the OPDC board, you refused it, didn't you?
No, we didn't refuse it. We
Really?
actually had a date in the diary.
Well, I've got an email in front of me here, sent by David on the 25th of June, which says, "Let's discuss tomorrow, but I hope you don't mind me being direct if I say that for me, a board-only visit would cross a red line, and I strongly advise that GW, that's Jeff Warren, is given no quarter on this, including giving the board this as an option. It's a fundamental point of principle that OPDC's exec must be present, and GW must not be allowed to drive a wedge between non-execs and execs, a position which I know my team shares equally strongly. Can we also agree that there should be no further written comms with CG, Car Giant, without prior discussion, as I'm anxious that we don't inadvertently prejudice our position?"
That
sounds like a
that is
refusal.
entirely true, but prior to that, I had engaged, I don't know whether you've seen the previous email exchange or you've just been given a selection of it, but I had actually engaged in an email exchange with Jeff Warren in which I said I was very happy to bring, in fact I did say I thought the whole board would be less than helpful if you have a great circus.
Apparently you offered
making
one
a visit.
board
I
member.
said I would be happy to take the investment committee to meet him. We had a date in the diary. I managed to round up the key members of the investment committee. I spoke to the executive. We agreed, because we are non-executive board members, that it would be sensible to have members of the executive with us on that visit. I emailed Jeff Warren and said I was proposing to bring David and 2 other members of the team, and he wrote back and said we would not be welcome on that basis. That was what prompted...
What's the objection to all of the board going? on the site
Well,
visit?
first of all, actually orchestrating it at this stage. I mean, it was difficult enough getting the investment committee together, given that sort of the general leave season has started. But I thought in the interest of getting it up and running as quickly as possible, take the investment committee. I don't think it's necessary for the whole board to troop round. We manage a system of sort of delegated responsibility. We have an investment committee to look at issues of investment. They would report back fully to the board. I mean, that's how I would expect matters to be handled in industry or in government. You don't have to take everybody.
Right, so
But, you know, I'm perfectly happy to reopen the possibility of a greater number of the board. I mean, in fact, I offered the invitation to a number of members of the board because I knew one or two of the investment committee were having trouble with their diaries. So, you know, I think we would have had a very good representative
but it's the
sample.
language in this email that's interesting. I mean, how would the board going to Car Giant collectively be driving a wedge between anybody?
No, I don't think it's the issue about the board collectively. I think it's the issue of the board not being allowed to take any of their executives with them. I just see that. I don't believe it is a particularly sensible way of proceeding for somebody like, you know, one of our landowners to be dictating who can come on a visit to see the operation, when it is the executive who have to give advice to the non-executives. Now, that doesn't mean the non-executive board would necessarily take that advice, but I think it's extremely helpful for the executives to be present and hear what we're hearing. I mean, that is the way I've always worked in government. When ministers make visits, they generally have one or two, or when MPs make visits, they generally have one or two executives with them.
Yeah,
as
I mean,
well.
to be honest, I'm not going to argue that point because I agree with you. I'm more puzzled by why the board members themselves shouldn't be allowed to go.
Sorry.
Well, the invitation, as I understand it, was extended individually to every board member.
Yes.
And there has been action taken to prevent that from happening.
No, not prevent it from happening. I said to the board, my suggestion to the board was that we should let the investment committee go in the first instance because we could set that up more quickly. And I think the investment committee, who are all board members, by the way, you know, would actually be able to get to grips with the issues rather more easily than having sort of 12 people trooping around. No, it's a matter of practical management. That was all. There's nothing sinister saying, you know, I don't want the board to go. Jeff Warren has now invited the whole of the budget and performance committee as well. I've no doubt they'll make up their mind whether they want to go, but I'm sure they'll want to have some officials with them if they go.
Well, speaking as the chairman of the Budget and Performance Committee, you're right, of course, we will take officials. I don't know how many members are going to go, I'm certainly going to go. One more question on Car Giant. What obligations do the OPDC have in terms of relocating Car Giant should the plans go forward?
I'll let David explain the technicalities of this because there's two ways of actually looking at acquisition of the Car Giant land.
Yeah. The first thing I'd want to say is that it's really quite important to us that we try and secure a constructive dialogue with Car Giant. You know, we are certainly not interested in a standoff position. We think that Car Giant's interests and OPDC's interests can be aligned. They don't appear to be at the moment, but we're hopeful that in due course we will have a constructive engagement with them. We are going to be looking to bring forward our early phase development sites. That will include the acquisition and development of a relatively small amount of Car Giant's land. We're being very careful in preparing our plans to minimise any impacts on the Car Giant business because we certainly don't want to undermine its viability. And that's why we are still in a process of working through the precise alignment of some of our early stage infrastructure. And we have repeatedly made the suggestion to Car Giant that they sit down and engage with us in that exercise so that we can properly understand how best to take account of their current business needs. So I think that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing to say is that we would very much hope that we can move forward to acquire Car Giant land interests through negotiation. Obviously compulsory purchase is an ultimate backstop position and we may have to use it, but that's not our intention. Our intention would be to seek to settle with Car Giant and indeed any other owners at landowners at Old Oak through private treaty negotiation. And obviously the obligations that sit with us in terms of the statutory code and requirements around compulsory purchase, if indeed we get to that point, do involve the option of looking actively at relocation. That's something that we've done a lot of work to assess. We know as well that Car Giant themselves have looked very seriously at the option of relocation in recent years. And, you know, we stand ready at every point to seek an active discussion and engagement with the owners of Car Giant to see if we can assist with their relocation plans. Now, I appreciate at the moment they are saying that they have no wish to relocate, but clearly if we are successful in bringing forward our draft local plan, successful in drawing down our HIF allocation, and successful in terms of delivering our objectives, then it will in time require Car Giant to move. We think we can assist with that process. We think it's perfectly viable to relocate the business, and that offer is something that remains on the table with the owners of Car Giant.
Have you identified an alternative site?
We have identified what we believe to be a potential alternative site.
Have you communicated that to Car Giant?
Well, as I've said, unfortunately at the moment, Car Giant are not willing to formally or actively communicate with us beyond extending an invitation to the board to have a visit and presentation on the terms that Liz has just explained. So the position that Car Giant have put to us on the record is that until the local plan process EIP is concluded, which it will be, we hope, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, they're not willing to formally engage with us. So clearly, once the EIP is over, we will seek to re-engage with them, and relocation is certainly one of those items that we are very keen to discuss with them.
Okay, I mean, my original question was how would you characterise the relations between the OPDC leadership and Car Giant? Fair to say they've broken down then?
Well, as I say, there is no formal, or Car Giant have taken the view that they don't want to have any formal engagement with OPDC at this stage. And they've made it clear to us that...
other than at the board. I mean, Jeff Warren's very happy to have the board visit.
Yeah, but on his terms. So in terms of an active, formal engagement with Car Giant and the executive team at OPDC, until the EIP process is concluded, the owners of Car Giant have said that they don't wish to have an active engagement with them, and they've given the reason for that as being that they don't want to compromise their objections or their position as objectors to the draft local plan.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask what added value is the OPDC providing to London and particularly the local economies?
Well,
I think initially our value is in planning for a future new district. It would be difficult to actually put a number on what we have currently contributed. I mean, other than that we have lifted a number of functions, particularly the planning function from the 3 boroughs, which we are doing on the borough's behalf, except for the redelegation back to Ealing, the particular area around Acton. But what we have done is prepared a local plan, prepared a master plan, which gives us a blueprint for creating a future district that is going to bring homes and jobs. That's when we will be delivering the value to London.
Okay, and how will you be supporting employment opportunities for local people, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds that would particularly like to see benefit from this project?
Well, David's talked a little bit about our apprentice programme already. We will certainly be following the practice of the Olympic Delivery Authority when we actually get to the stage of doing major works on the site, of expecting developers who employ contractors to actually create local job opportunities, to create apprenticeships. We're supporting the businesses in Park Royal in the way in every way we conceivably can, and they have a very, very strong local employment ethos. You know, obviously they prefer to employ local people. It's easier to get local people into Park Royal. So I think the longer term sort of job creation is going to help the local jobs market, and where we have the power to intervene to make sure people do take locals, then we will do so. We don't have that power in a lot of places, but we can simply encourage.
Okay. And what types of jobs are you expecting to be in the regenerated OPDC, and how will you ensure that local residents have the necessary skills to apply for them? Because this is about more than apprenticeships, really.
Yeah, well, in the longer term, I think OPDC, well, first of all, we'll have a construction phase, so there'll be construction jobs. And I think, as David has already said, very much sort of leveraging off the Mayor's whole approach to construction skills and his skills academy, and looking at how we can use that, how we can work with the local colleges, and indeed we already are doing, to make sure people are skilled to take advantage of that. So that's the construction phase. I mean, in the longer term, we can't be absolutely clear about the type of businesses that we're going to attract to Park Royal, to OPDC, and I would hope that there would be a big cross-section. I mentioned earlier that we're almost contiguous with Imperial West and the whole sort of healthcare, public health spin-off from Imperial. So I would hope there'd be high quality spin-off research type, spin-off type product development jobs there. There's a whole sort of artistic quarter developing in Harlesden, north of Willesden Junction. I hope that would we'd be able to encourage people from there to spill over into OPDC. I would hope that we would be able to build on the extraordinary range of sort of activities that currently happen in Park Royal. And, that has everything from small, lower skilled assembly type jobs right through to sort of highly skilled. There's actually a stained glass workshop there, and the people who work in that are clearly hugely skilled. So I think, and then around the actual station, when HS2 is completed and we can see the development of that space, we're going to have much more traditional office, where I would hope that we'd be able to attract head offices of international corporations, because it'll be a fabulously connected spot. So I think we're going to have a really good opportunity to get a cross-section of different employment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Assembly Member Curtin.
I'd like to ask you a couple more questions about Car Giant, if I may. You mentioned that you want to purchase a small amount of their land. How much is that as a percentage figure?
As a percentage of
As
what?
a percentage of their total land for the Phase 1A development.
I was going to say, let's and I'll let David get into the detail, but yes, there's two stages to this. So just for ease of reference, let's call it 1A and 1B. And 1A, which we've also called the Northern Arc, Union Road, it seems to have had umpteen different names. This is the one where we will require some relatively small parts of Car Giant's site, and David can explain those. Then 1B is the bulk of the Car Giant site, which, when it ultimately comes forward, clearly if we're going to develop that, Car Giant won't be able to stay, and that's what we've got to look at some sort of future agreement about. One or other of us will have to develop it. Car Giant's business will have to go somewhere else. So let's just deal with the 1A first, and the little packets of land where we're trying to absolutely minimise the amount we need to take. And we have spent months looking at this, about how we can actually design our plans so that we really do not take a significant amount.
But what percentage?
So
what percentage for the 1A?
Do you know what percentage it is of?
So I think we've issued what we call a dotted red line plan, which is the plan that we're using to go out and spend time consulting in detail with occupiers and landowners. It's a dotted line because we are still refining our final plans that will inform how much land we actually need to take. So the dotted line obviously contains a wider area than we think is likely to be necessary once we conclude our plans, probably in a few months' time. Within our Phase 1A plans, in other words, our early delivery phase, which is associated directly with our Housing Infrastructure Fund investment, we are potentially going to be looking to acquire around 25% of Car Giant's land ownership. However, I can see the expressions, very little of that is actually operational land for Car Giant's main business. So a large amount of that land that we are looking to acquire for Phase 1A development is long leasehold interest that Car Giant have in non-related functions.
Well, you say that. Well, what percentage of that is
So-
operational land?
Well, we think certainly well under 10%, probably closer to 5%.
So 10% of the
And it
whole
includes
of the Car
things like-
Giant's land.
Yeah, and we're
Is
looking
you say
to,
so? You're saying 10% you want to acquire 25% of Car Giant's land for Phase 1A, of which 15% is non-operational and 10% is operational.
No,
Is
no,
that
I don't
what
want
you're
to be held very specifically to numbers because, as I say, our plans are evolving. But what I am saying is that within our published dotted red line, it is about 25%, but the vast majority of that is non-operational. It's land that Car Giant own as investments. It's got other businesses that are not connected directly with the Car Giant operation. So if you look at the Car Giant operation, which is about, retail space, it's about operational factory-style units where they process vehicles and so forth, we're not looking to take that in our Phase 1A plans. It's primarily land that Car Giant own as investment, but is non-operational. Some of it is road space, which they use to what they call a test track to test vehicles, and we're confident that there are alternatives locally that can be used for testing vehicles.
You're
And it's
confident.
things
Have
like-
you identified?
It's things like car
Have you
park.
identified alternative localities for the test track then?
Yeah, we certainly have.
Okay, can you say what they are?
Well, no, not
Where?
here and now
Where?
without site
Okay.
plans and so forth.
Right.
But we've very carefully looked at how we can avoid impacting the operational business of Car Giant, which is why, as I say, the amount of operational land that we may be looking to acquire for early phase development is going to be very marginal indeed. And we're quite confident that we can evidence that this will not impact in any detrimental way to their business.
How many homes do you plan to build on that 25% of Car Giant's land that you want to purchase it for Phase 1A? Or what do you propose to do with that land?
So our first phase development, we think, will deliver around about 3,000 homes.
And that's not just Car Giant land, though.
No, that's the whole of phase
That's
1A.
Phase 1A.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, how much? My question was, how many homes are you planning to build on the 25% of Car Giant's land that you want to purchase? I mean, what precisely do you plan to do with just the land that you want to purchase from Car Giant for Phase 1A? How many homes and what else are you going to do with
Well, I'm not going to give a figure to that at the moment because, as I say, our plans are still being worked through. The reason that we're consulting
sure,
within this
okay.
dotted red line boundary is to understand as precisely as we can what the needs of the various landowners and businesses are, and to use that process to finally align or secure an alignment for the infrastructure we need and the alignment for the precise alignment for development plots. But we're a considerable way away from lodging a planning
I don't
application.
have an awful lot of time, so I just want to get an answer from you. I mean, you mentioned 3,000 homes for the whole of Phase 1A. Now, how much of Phase 1A in terms of land is that 25% you want to purchase from Car Giant? I mean, is the 25% of Car Giant's land just a small part of Phase 1A, or is it a large part of Phase 1A?
Phase 1A is a combination of development plots which will be largely residential development, not exclusively, but largely residential development, utilities infrastructure and roads, hard infrastructure. And, the land that we need to acquire that currently is in ownership or the long leasehold interest of Car Giant is land that will either be developed for housing or other things, or it will be land that's required to, because we need to construct the new east-west access road through it.
Okay.
But we haven't, for example, decided exactly where an energy centre would go. So an energy centre might end up on that a piece of Car Giant land or a piece of other land. There's Network Rail
so
land, there's other land.
You're not
ownerships there.
certain yet about what is going to be on that land.
Especially
Right,
since we are
right.
still, or would like to be engaged in negotiation with Car Giant about
Okay.
how we can accommodate their particular needs.
Right. Let me ask you another question, Chair. Now, I understand that in a meeting of the Assembly here on the 11th of June, you said that provided we can crack on and work around the Car Giant land ownership, you could start phase 1A. Is that correct?
Yes.
It is. Okay, so you could start phase 1A without this purchase of Car Giant's land.
Sorry.
Is that
So
what you meant by that?
What I meant by that comment was that provided we can actually come to a sensible accommodation about the small parts of land that we actually need, which we genuinely do not believe would impact on Car Giant business, we can get cracking and Car Giant can carry on running their business. That's the ideal position that I would like to get to.
Okay, so that means what? So did you mean by that you would need, you want to purchase that 25%?
We do need some small parts of Car Giant's land.
25% of Car Giant's land?
25% of their overall land holding, yes, but not 25% of their car business land.
Okay, but that's 10% of the land you want, approximately
up
would
to
be
10%, but we haven't confirmed that yet.
So not,
we can't
okay,
engage.
right, well, coming back to sort of confirm what David said there earlier. Now, have you already started a compulsory purchase order process for that land? Have you already initiated the CPO process?
We have started a process. We haven't. I'm not quite sure whether I'm not sufficient of a CPO expert to know what counts as a CPO process.
David, are you a sufficient expert in CPOs
we have
to
published
answer the
our
question?
red line.
We've not issued a resolution to move to compulsory purchase, but what we have done is we've done a detailed land referencing exercise, and we have issued what's called Section 5A notices, which are the notices that have gone to all of the interests within what I've referred to as the dotted red line boundary. That is an important part of a process that any agency or organisation with compulsory purchase powers needs to do, because unless we can evidence the fact that we've spoken in detail to all of the local interests that are within our plan area about what are their business needs, what are their concerns, what are their requirements. Unless we can evidence that we've been through that process,
so that
then
is
it's going to be quite difficult to
process.
move into the
You've
more
started
formal
it.
process, which will start at some point in the next period. So we have started the essential preliminary works, which could ultimately lead to compulsory purchase.
Right.
Is the answer.
Okay. Thank you for your answers.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Moving on to the issue of placemaking, how will you ensure that any development proposals deliver the highest standards of placemaking, urban design and architecture? Don't know which of you wants to have a go with this one.
I'll start, and David will chip in, because you and I have discussed this before. In fact, it's come up on a number of occasions. I am personally, I wouldn't have taken on this job if I hadn't been interested in creating something that people would look at as an exemplar of placemaking. I can think of places in London that I don't consider to have done that. I've lived and worked in London for many years. So we have a very, very strong focus on how we would actually, or how we have started to master plan the site, and we've done a big master planning exercise over the last 2 years. We have significant amounts of green space. Yes, we are looking at high density development. It's no higher than other acceptable high density developments in London. And I think the importance of high density is it is well designed, it is well planned. It is certainly not nearly as dense as, for example, Battersea Nine Elms, the Nine Elms area. But big focus on environmental quality, big focus on the right sort of transport infrastructure to allow people to not have cars, big focus on substantial amounts of green space. So, I believe we're doing everything we conceivably can from a planning perspective, and a plan-making perspective, not a planning authority perspective. I'm just making that distinction from a plan-making perspective to ensure that we have the highest place-making objectives in what we're doing. We have our own head of design. We have a design review panel. We also have our design review group, which is different. So two separate elements of that. I have sat in on meetings with our head of design, discussing the HS2 station. I know how rigorously They take anybody who's coming forward with a development to task over what they're actually doing for creating the environment. But I mean, do you want to add
because I've not got much, a huge amount of time.
Sorry,
I mean, it's fine. I mean, you mentioned Nine Elms, Battersea, which I just think is grim. Places like Lewisham Gateway, grim. I think one of the problems is in these areas, it's developer-led, essentially, regeneration. And what I'm keen on is this is very much led by led by the OPDC.
I agree.
Just going on to the point of, you mentioned density and height. So in policy SP2 on good growth and SP6 places and destinations, they both deal with placemaking. What effect do you think those policies are going to have on the type of high density developments that will be built? And I'm thinking, is high density going to mean towers? I know that towers aren't particularly great for people to live in. Are you going to try and achieve high density in a sort of low and medium rise way?
I'll let David talk about specific heights. There will be some towers, but we're not covering OPDC with towers. And we very much see the higher buildings going in certain locations where they will be most appropriate, around the station, on the edges of the site. But as I said before, high density doesn't have to be bad placemaking. So do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting point, and I mean, I very much agree with Tom, actually. One of the things that, interests me and excites me about OPDC, and certainly I think will continue to do so long as I'm involved in it, is that exactly your point. This needs to be seen as, quite public sector led. This is going to involve lots of partnerships with business, with developers and the development community, but the opportunity to lead from the front with a lot of public investment and a lot of public land ownership means that we get to sort of set the terms for, if you like, clienting that responsibility to have excellence in design. I also think that the density point, I understand very well all the controversies around densities and building heights and all the rest of it. I think that's actually a really exciting challenge as well, because as we know, London is going to see more dense development going forward. That's very much what the new London plan's all about. It's an inevitability. I think there are some really very good examples of high density new development in London, and there are some examples that probably you and I might agree don't quite meet that mark. I'm very clear, and I know Liz is very clear, and I can promise you the board is extremely clear on this point, that we are not going to tolerate second or third best. It's got to be setting a new benchmark. And that's really the challenge and the goal here, setting a new benchmark for excellent design in high density environments.
I'm pleased to hear that, and I'll have to finish up there because of time, but just to say, even with the LLDC though, where you had, what was supposedly public sector led, there are still some absolutely, grim buildings going up around there. So I really hope that OPDC is going to be different. Thank you.
Okay. Right, before we move on to Housing Infrastructure Fund, any other general questions? Yeah? Okay, so can I call upon Assembly Member Berry for her question on Housing Infrastructure Fund?
I understand that they will answer from the papers, or do I have to ask it out loud?
Sorry, who do you want to answer?
Do I need to ask it out loud?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
I'm sorry, do I need to ask this question out loud? I thought they just spoke from, because it's a lead-off question.
Yes, you read it out.
Okay, in that case, can my time start now? Yes, good. So this is a question to Liz. Can I ask how the Housing Infrastructure Fund process has helped progress the OPDC plans?
Well, I think this has been hugely important. I mean, when I started this role, I was very concerned that we had very little. Let's just use the word subsidy as a sort of convenient way of saying, public sector input to this. Other than the fact that the mayor was financing our running costs. Now, the one bit of potential public sector subsidy we had was the MOU, which allowed us access to the Network Rail land at existing use value, but you still need money to actually buy it at existing use value. So it was extremely fortunate that the Housing Infrastructure Fund came along, and the team, and indeed the GLA, reacted very quickly to leap in and make a bid.
Can just stop a minute? Can I just ask for somebody to look at the sound, which is not circulating the room? Can I ask guests to speak into the microphones and members as well?
Right.
Thank
Okay, do you want me to start again? I'm conscious I'm taking
Yes.
No, carry on.
Barry's time, actually.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
I could hear you.
You could hear me, that's right. Yes, so the Housing Infrastructure Fund bid has been absolutely crucial to unlocking this. And it has allowed us to develop the plan for Phase 1A, to identify the infrastructure we need to unlock that, hopefully to get the acceptance of the bid, which we now need to nail. And then once we've done that, that will allow us to unlock what I called Phase 1B earlier, the bigger part of the site. So, yeah, it's probably quite difficult to see where we'd be without the Housing Infrastructure Fund money.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you've been quite clear you haven't got the money in the bank
no.
yet. Last time we spoke about this, I think this was at the Budget Committee, you said that the conditions on the Housing Infrastructure Fund were set after the government announcement of funding, and that the government announcement followed 6 months of you, I think you said, badgering MHCLG to put an announcement out. So were the conditions only set after the announcement, and is that part of any problem?
Exactly how these were put together within MHCLD, Homes England, you'd have to ask them. Quite a lot of them are standard conditions, so we could have foreseen quite a lot of them. Well, we did foresee quite a lot of them. But then there are specific conditions related to our site. I must admit, and it's, I said earlier in my opening remarks, there are times when I sort of wake up at night worrying about parts of this programme. When I met the Budget and Performance Committee, that was probably one of my more depressed days, thinking, oh my goodness, when are we actually going to get through this? I feel a lot better today, actually. I think we've had some very constructive engagements with Homes England. David's been doing his utmost to chivvy along the whole process. Whilst I couldn't say with certainty we'll be able to nail everything by a certain date, I do feel we're on a rather more positive trajectory than we were when I last spoke to you.
Okay, so just to check, you have to meet every single one of the conditions, and there's quite a few of them, to get the money.
Do we? Every single one?
Well, I think they've set the conditions out very clearly.
That's a yes or no question, though, isn't it? Are they all of them, or just like the majority?
It's a dialogue. Is the
I
right
think
thing
these things
to
are
say.
always subject
And I think
to
there's always a question
negotiation.
about how do you meet some of the conditions, because they're not all yes or no's. Some of them have got some room for discussion and negotiation.
Okay. Are any of them out of your control? For example, are any of them related to investment decisions by the government or TfL or anything like that?
I think some of them are not entirely within our control, but I think we have a lot of influence over all of the conditions that government have set.
Okay. Can you publish the conditions that you've negotiated? Because that would be, obviously, in terms of our scrutiny, in terms of seeing what progress is happening, are they able to be published now that they're agreed?
No, because MHCLG have been very clear with us that they don't wish them to be published, and so if they were to be published, I think we would need their agreement.
Okay, well, I think we'll need to go back to them on this, because all we can tell is what we can surmise. So we know that, for example, one of the conditions is that the GLA underwrites it, essentially. Another one is that you get your local plan through. So we know those, and we're guessing at those. But in terms of other things that might cause a wrinkle or a problem, we're in the dark. We just keep hearing that you're confident or you feel differently on different days. That's not very helpful to us in terms of tracking how you're doing.
I appreciate it's not very helpful, but I feel my hands are slightly tied on this one. The people who are giving us the money have said, these are commercially sensitive documents, and we would prefer them not to be published.
Okay. Meanwhile,
that's where we stand.
The GLA is underwriting the £250 million, just in case any of these conditions, which we don't know about, might not come off.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, because, and I think this is a matter that is in the public domain, that one of the terms of HIF, regardless of whether it's Old Oak or any of the other HIF bids, is that the agency that submits the bid is ultimately accountable for the money that is allocated. So the GLA is ultimately accountable for all of the forward funding HIF bids that have been submitted, including Old Oak.
that's different to underwriting it so you can get on and spend it, isn't it?
Well, ultimately, you know, the GLA takes responsibility and accountability for delivering according to, you know, the HIF milestones. So, you know, just like any other upper tier authority that's submitted bids, if those bids are allocated, that upper tier authority, in this case obviously the GLA, is responsible to government for ensuring that that money is delivered in accordance with the contract conditions, and that is a matter of public record.
Okay, but in terms of you getting on and planning things,
Yes.
you can do that now. You can start to plan to spend the HIF money, or is this why you're waiting for a mayoral decision? This is all or nothing in terms of you getting on with your work.
The point that I made earlier was that, you know, I'd had the discussion with the mayor, you know, to say that, you know, we will need to do certain things in advance of actually getting the HIF money in the bank. You know, will you support us during that period? That is what is now going to be the subject of a mayoral direction, which we expect to see very shortly. So you will see that. That will be in the public domain, and you know that will happen within the next
short period,
couple of weeks, I hope.
Okay, I would have thought, you know, if this is allowing you to spend money, we might...
That's not 250 million. The mayor's not offering me a cheque for 250 million to tide us over.
But it's allowing you to spend money that we may not get back.
In
you would expect the conditions to be in that decision.
In theory, you are right. It is money that we might not get back. But the alternative is we down tools, don't do anything, and then actually that puts us in a very weak position to cement the HIF bid. So it's a balanced judgment, and I mean, we've had an interesting and feisty discussion with the mayor's budget people about this, and we have whittled down what we think we need to the absolute minimum, which we consider to be, you know, at the lowest possible risk, and it will fund a number of things which we think have to happen anyway in this area.
Okay, I just want to ask about one of the specific bits of infrastructure, essentially, and what you do with it. The street that's going to be built, that's part of the HIF bid, isn't it?
The road.
The road, I think you could call it a street. I prefer that, actually.
I don't know, there may be a subtlety in that I've missed. Anyway,
it's a link across the railway line.
Yes, a key road.
And obviously, we hope, as Greens, this road, this street, would be used principally for public transport, walking and cycling. And we would hope that this would be brought forward, these activities on the street would be brought forwards as early as possible, potentially at the construction stage, because construction workers need to walk, cycle, and use buses to get to work. At the moment, there's not even a bus along Hyde Road, for example. The closest you can get is Scrubs Lane. I think there's only one bus on there. So is there work that you're doing to bring forwards, now that you've got your infrastructure plans, public transport onto that infrastructure to prevent it being a car-dependent development from the start, including during construction?
I'll say straight away, I absolutely agree with the principle of what you said, and that's a principle that underpins all of our development. I think the other bit of traffic on whatever this road is called is likely to be car giant vehicles doing test drives, but that may be an issue that we can talk about later. David, do you want to say something about our approach to transport?
Yes, and the commitment in our draft local plan is absolutely to have as little reliance as possible on the car. You know, it's going to be an incredibly well-connected place because, you know, you've got Wilston Junction, you're going to have the new HS2 station. In time, we hope we might even get stations at Old Oak and Hythe Road. This is going to be a plan that has a very, very low 0.2 car parking spaces, so, you know, really at the bottom end. It's going to be very clear that a lot of development... I'm
trying to specifically... Sorry, I haven't got much time, so I'm going to interrupt you. I'm trying to specifically ask about Phase 1A and things you can start planning for now, which are public transport bus routes through that area for the builders and then to serve the earliest residents. Local plans have a tendency to put in all the stuff that's car dependent and then add the buses sort of later at the last stage, and that does lead to car dependency. And while you've got so much construction work going on, it would be great if you would start looking at public transport infrastructure for Phase 1A right sort of now, today.
I think we both agree with you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I note that your plan to use essentially land value uplift to fund infrastructure by selling land essentially at a profit. what are the short, medium and long-term risks around the proposals to resell land which is ready for development, and how will you mitigate those?
Well, there are a number of ways, if we look specifically at phase 1A, there are a number of ways that we could actually implement. We can buy the land we're entitled to buy off Network Rail. We can acquire other land from other landowners. We haven't completely firmed up on the precise way we might do that, because there might be other ways to cut the cake. There might be ways to do joint ventures with Network Rail, for example, that would then actually save us having to shell out capital up front to buy land. And then you would simply have to have some sort of overage agreement in the future. All of this, of course, is going to be very dependent on how the whole sort of land, housing, other land market goes in, well, London. And that, well, you can almost sort of, take a wet finger in the air. You pick your valuers and ask them what they think is going to happen to land values. The views we've certainly had from a lot of our advisors is that whilst there may be a number of blips over the next, the immediate future, generally in the longer term, they are confident that we are going to see rising land values in this area, and that's what we would hope to benefit from. And I think it's important that whatever sort of deals we do with anybody, we make sure we do get our share of the value uplift. You and I have spoken about this many times before, and I'm a strong believer in making sure that we do get that.
When are you proposing, though, will you essentially have taken everything through essentially sort of everything through a planning application? So will there be sort of an outline permission, and then you'll send the land on to a developer to build out?
I don't know yet.
You don't know
I don't think we've reached that stage. I mean, we've done some relatively sort of soft market engagement. We've been talking to people who might be potential developers. They might be partners, they might be delivery partners. There's lots of different ways of cutting this, but I can assure you that sort of I and the team and the investment committee, and we've got some good canny property people on our investment committee to make sure that we actually derive as much value as we feasibly can from sites under our control.
Can you do it in a way which allows the public sector to retain a stake, or even the public? So you can, like TfL are doing with
that is exactly that is one option, and I'm a great believer. In public sector, if they've got any land, keeping a handle on it.
Absolutely.
So that on some of it now, or rather, you sell a certain share, you do a joint venture, but you have skin in the game, so that when there is substantial uplift in the future, you get a proportion of it.
Yes.
Selling off everything on day one is not necessarily a good idea.
Well, I entirely concur with that. Yes. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think I think if the public sector tries to, go it alone, so to speak, then if everything goes really well, then, you get all the uplift, and that's terrific. But of course, if you get your sums wrong, you're in trouble, either because the values are not there, or because the cash flow's not there, and the market won't buy sites at the right time at the right price. And obviously, if you're using that to fund infrastructure, you can't suddenly stop building your road. So I think that, there are some challenges around that model. Equally, if you expect the private sector to do everything, well, they're going to have to price in the risk and the cost of capital and all those things, and you tend to lose control. So I do wonder whether there is a sort of sweet spot here where, in return for our money and our investment, it may be that we can partner with an agency or a series of organisations to share risk and reward. But I'm very clear, I agree with you, that if the public sector is going to step into this very challenging project at the beginning with at least £250 million of money, then we need to have a share of whatever the uplift is going forward. And we will need that too, because ultimately this is going to need more than 250 million of public money to unlock the entirety of the site. So my guess is that there's some sort of sweet spot where we will probably be looking for partners to share risk and reward. But as Liz says, we're not quite at the stage of knowing exactly when that moment will happen.
Just finally, will the fact that you are able to fund some of the infrastructure around the site give you a better negotiating position when agreeing levels of affordable housing with developers?
I think the answer is yes, because I mean you will know whenever there's a negotiation with a developer. Well, I certainly know, because I've sort of seen it from the developer's side. They will say, here is our viability. we have this amount of headroom, we can either fund your infrastructure or we can fund your affordable housing. Now, which would you like it to be? You know, there is not enough money in the pot for everything. Now, of course, you can press the developers because you never believe the first, the first story they tell you. But, you know, ultimately that is indeed true. There is never enough money in the pot for absolutely everything. So there's always going to be a trade-off. If we've just put £250 million into infrastructure, then you would not expect if the developers are not having to pay that, that means they've got more headroom on the affordable housing front. And by the way, I should just add, we are a mayoral development corporation. We have to we have to follow the mayor's policy on affordable housing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Assemblymember Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Liz, you mentioned earlier on about unfortunate uncertainty about HS2. I want to ask the question about this very future of high-speed 2. As we all know, the chair of HS2 is carrying out the project review, and this is in the context of the frontrunner to be the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's comment, and I quote, "There are projects we should have on transport in the north of the country that ought to take precedent over HS2, unquote." Do you think that if the HS2 were to be scrapped, it will still be viable in terms of developing the planned major development and regeneration that we have for the OPDC area?
Right, well, this is very much my personal view, and I don't know what the Mayor's position would be on this. I think if we didn't have HS2, I think it would put a whole different complexion on what we do at Old Oak, especially in the next sort of 10 to 20 years. I mean, my personal view, it would probably set back the regeneration of that area of London by about 20 years. I would guess, and that's a very wet finger in the air. Now, I mean, there's just a couple of other things to say on that, and again, this is the view of Liz Peace, not necessarily the view of the Mayor. There is an issue around a Crossrail station at Old Oak. At the moment, the station development, where the HS2 station will be, will also incorporate a Crossrail station. It will also incorporate 4 platforms for the Great Western lines to stop. Now, something the GLA might want to look at is whether you would still build a Crossrail station even if HS2 wasn't coming in. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but that's one way in which you could at least achieve improved transport link. Let's assume that didn't happen. If you actually look at the north of the Old Oak site, we have another fantastic transport interchange, which I don't think has been developed up to its full potential, and that's Willesden Junction. So you might actually want to shift the whole focus of what you're trying to do to Willesden Junction. But again, that would be a GLA TfL decision. Whether you'd need a mayoral development corporation to do either of those things, I think becomes a matter for debate. I certainly think it would put the our overall rationale for being into some, well, a large degree of doubt.
I had posed this question to the Mayor only last week, I think, or at the last Mayor's question time. And he clearly stated in response that he said, I would be recommending to the new PM to continue with HS2. But given the position that Boris Johnson has taken on that, obviously, and there's a whole host of reviews being undertaken, there are deep concerns about HS2, and hopefully we will know by the end of the year. I think that there's, Liz Truss MP also said that HS2 decision will be due at the end of this calendar year. Given that there are serious concerns about HS2 being scrapped, should you and the Mayor and the GLA not be looking at Plan B to see whether the current planned delivery, major delivery of 25,000 homes, 65,000 jobs is actually going to be viable? So is this something you already thinking about it, talking about it, or should you not be? Why wait for another year when you know that the whole thing is at a major risk?
Well, we're certainly thinking about it, and it's never far from our thoughts. I absolutely believe HS2 is a project that needs to go ahead, but I'm not the Prime Minister. It's perhaps worth remembering, of course, that one of the candidates for the Prime Ministerial position was indeed the Mayor of London at the time at which it was agreed to set up OPDC to benefit from the HS2 station. So I would hope we... Yeah. Look, I don't know where this is going.
I appreciate
it.
I
can't tell
the
you.
point is...
And I've just outlined to you what I think we would need to look at if indeed HS2 doesn't go ahead. Now, we can start planning for those eventualities now, but isn't it actually better to just see what we can do to at least capitalise on the money that we've been offered, work out how we can get started on the planning for that? I've already said we're going to minimise our expenditure and try and look at those things which we think wouldn't be wasted in the long term. So, for example, cracking ahead with energy supply. There's always going to be a need for some additional energy supply in this area. So that's not going to be money wasted. Even if sites were acquired, and we don't have a specific plan on that, we can do something with those sites, whatever happens. But I think we would have to reconsider the whole position of OPDC.
Yeah. See, the big question for all of us is that if HS2 goes, with that Crossrail likely to go as well, what happens then?
Yeah.
Is the current scale of delivery and regeneration is going to be viable at all? I'll leave you that comment.
My personal view, and I haven't discussed this with the Mayor, but I should think it would be I'd be surprised if he didn't agree with me or his advisors didn't agree, would be that I don't think the scale or the ambitious plans we have are viable without HS2 and Crossrail, certainly not for another couple of decades.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask you about green infrastructure. As Assembly members, we can do individual reports, and I did one on biodiversity in new housing developments. It's obviously not just a housing development at OPDC, but it is a major development. And so the concept of threading green infrastructure through it and maintaining biodiversity is one that is now becoming enshrined in the forthcoming New London Plan. And I just wondered if you could set out what you consider to be the main challenges in maintaining biodiversity and getting that green infrastructure in.
You'll have that on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, there's a very clear commitment in the draft local plan to at least 30% green space within the development overall, and that's something we're taking very, very seriously. There's a strong commitment in the draft local plan to a green infrastructure, including things like sustainable urban drainage. So we're looking very actively at how we can incorporate elements of biodiversity and amenity into, if you like, the kind of service infrastructure of the site. And then I think one of the most enticing and exciting things about Old Oak is the fact that it's got this kind of green waterway running through the middle of it, of course, with the canal, which, is only really partly used at the moment. And for those of you that have been down there, it's not the most sort of exciting prospect to walk down the towpath, which is one of the reasons why, amidst all of this work that's going on around HIF and strategic infrastructure and planning, I think some of the most exciting work we're doing actually is around some of the early activation projects, looking at things like improving access to the scrubs itself, because of course we've got this terrific green space park on our southern boundary, looking at early activation projects to open up more of the canal space and celebrate some of the biodiversity there, and get a lot more people using the waterways as well.
So in practical terms, what do you think you can do to maximise the benefit then of the Grand Union Canal and of the Metropolitan Open Land at Wormwood Scrubs?
Well, I think partly it's about making sure that all of our plans celebrate that space and incorporate it as best they can. I think secondly, it's about making as many early improvements as we can to the maintenance and access to those spaces. It's also about doing quite a lot of promotion. So we are investing with the local community organisations in terms of events that can get people canoeing on the canal, get people doing voluntary clean-ups of the canal towpath, doing events in the scrubs itself. So I think it's a range of things, partly strategic, partly operational and partly promotional.
And as I said, it's not just housing, but you've obviously got the sort of industrial areas and you've got the strategic industrial land. How will you use the new urban greening factor and the promotion of net biodiversity gain in those areas as well? Because you've talked about maintaining 30% green overall and using SUDs as part of that process and the open space in the canal. But in the strategic industrial areas, it would be nice to think that it's going to be there as well.
Yeah, so it's a good point, and we are currently looking to make a £10 million submission to the Livable Neighbourhoods Fund at TfL, very specifically to address some of those challenges in Park Royal in the industrial areas that you're talking about. So, for instance, at the moment, you know, there's a big reliance on people driving to work. The state of the public realm is not very good. We want to see a lot more development of small green spaces in Park Royal. We want to see more emphasis on cycling and public transport. We want to see a comprehensive programme of traffic reduction within Park Royal, not to undermine the commercial viability of those places, but to get people out and celebrating some of the public space that badly needs improvement. So assuming that we're successful in that Livable Neighbourhoods Fund project, then I would hope that this time next year, if we come back, we'll be able to talk you through some of the more detailed plans.
Do you think you might be talking to some of the developers about green walls being incorporated into the strategic industrial developments and perhaps green or even brown roofs? I mean, I'm pleased to hear that there'll be good cycling connections. So obviously that's important. Not everybody should be coming by car.
Yep, definitely. Brown roofs, green walls, absolutely. And,
okay, so we won't be seeing you allowing the developers to max out on biodiversity offset contributions somewhere else?
Hopefully not, no.
Hopefully not. That's very good. And you were talking about the access for local people. Do you think there will be the possibility of improving some of the bridges, which, I mean, you've already pointed out the towpaths are pretty unwelcoming at the moment, but I think having nicer bridges, I think it's a shame in many parts of London that we've got these bridges where you can't actually see quite often that you're travelling over little rivers or canals. Is that something that you're thinking of improving? I can see nodding coming.
and also I'm sort of smiling because I'm always staggered about how many bridges things we're going to have to be creating. And one of the earliest ones that we'd like to get cracking on is a bridge over the Grand Union Canal to link with what we hope will be the Oaklands North development into the north of the site. And this will have to be a well-designed bridge. The Canals and Rivers Trust have made it absolutely clear, and we agree with them. This isn't just about sticking a sort of utilitarian bridge over the canal. So it will be a well-designed bridge, and yes, we will be taking account of everything you say. And I so agree with you that what you could do to improve the canal, because the canal there is a terrific asset. I mean, it's twice the width of the Grand Union Canal I knew in my being brought up in Birmingham. That's a very narrow canal. We've got a fabulous wide one, and the towpaths are terrific, but they don't feel very safe at the moment.
Well, I look forward to that element of the infrastructure being improved as well. Thank you, Chair.
Morning.
Good morning.
Just sticking on infrastructure, and you touched on it when you answered my colleague, Assemblymember Shah, in terms of HS2. Your strategic plan 2016-19 says that delay to Crossrail construction will affect the financial viability of the master plan. Can you elaborate on if that's had any effect on the master plan now? Obviously, we know that Crossrail is delayed.
Has the delay in Crossrail had an impact on the master
on your
plan?
master plan and viability?
Crossrail, did you say?
Yeah. Crossrail.
No, I don't really think so, because obviously the current programme for HS2 station opening is 2026. So I would imagine that the Elizabeth line will definitely be running by 2026.
So I'm talking about Crossrail. So your strategic plan states if HS2 or Crossrail construction programmes are delayed or halted, this would materially impact on the transfer of land and financial deliverability of the master plan. So I just wanted to know what mitigation you were putting in place.
The point there is that the Crossrail station is dependent on HS2, so the key thing there is HS2. So were HS2 to be delayed, then you would be looking at you'd have to rerun quite a few of your numbers, because obviously HS2 and how quickly it gets in there is going to impact on potential land value. It's going to impact on how soon the work sites are freed up for development. So yes, if HS2 is delayed, we would have to rerun some of those assumptions.
You also touched on the fact that Willesden Junction could be an overground station. It could be developed. Another station, which wasn't mentioned, is Hythe Road. At our Budget and Performance Committee meeting, we heard that the funding for the overground station at Hythe Road is not on the agenda. What implications would this have for you?
Well, there's two overground stations, and I think I may have been guilty of perhaps presenting this in slightly the wrong way. You know, I sort of tend to call a spade, and it was pointed out to me that the situation is slightly more subtle on that with regard to the funding. The position is that neither station currently is budgeted for in TfL plans. According to TfL modelling, there is no transport need for Hythe Road station. From our perspective, we would like a station at Hythe Road because we think it would create a better regeneration, better access to public transport. So we would have to make a decision as we move into our sort of phase 1B about whether we would expect a potential developer to fund the Hythe Road station, or whether there are other sources of funding for Hythe Road station. So that is why it is currently, it is an aspiration, I think it would be fair to say. It is not a funded programme. The Old Oak station, which is sort of off down to the left, I should do these things without a map, thank you, to the west would be even better. TfL's, their modelling shows that there is a transport justification for that station, but they haven't anything in their budget for it. So again, that would be an aspiration, at some point in the future. I mean, one would always like lots of stations, but we can't have everything.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And obviously it's about priorities and demand and budget. So just on Hythe Road, you did state that TfL said that they've done the modelling and they don't believe there's any demand. Have they provided you with that modelling? Because they haven't actually publicly stated that they're not proceeding because of lack of demand. Do you have that information?
Hope I haven't put my foot in it yet again. I remember sitting in a meeting, this must be some time ago, with their modellers, their transport planners, and they said they had looked at it and there was no transport case for it. I thought that was in the public domain.
Well, it is now.
It is now. Yeah, right.
I think it's worth emphasising as well that regardless of Old Oak Station or Hythe Road Station, neither of which are funded at the moment. Let's be clear about that. Assuming that we get HS2 Crossrail station, and obviously we've got Willesden Junction, this is going to be an incredibly well-connected place, disregarding those two stations that currently don't have a funding route. I think it's probably going to be the case that nobody in our new Old Oak regeneration area is going to be more than, say, 10-minute walk away from two amazingly well-connected stations. So, this does not critically undermine our ambitions in terms of overall development or density.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I just make a little short notice to members? The clock in front of you is not functioning appropriately. I've got a technical hitch. And to Assembly members Pigeon and Russell, I admire your chutzpah, as they say in North London. No, you don't get a rerun of your time. I like it. I like being mouthed at, but no. You've had your time. It's just, at the moment, Labour group have got about 11 minutes left, and the Conservatives about 20 minutes, and we are timing it. from our own clock here. Okay, Assembly Member Shah, you've got a question?
Yes, Chair. I'd like to go back to Liz, your comment about David's appointment on 4.
Sorry, about...
I'd like to go back to your comment about David's appointment on
oh, okay, right.
yeah, 4 days a week basis.
Yeah.
How long will this arrangement last?
Sorry, I was momentarily distracted. For the foreseeable future, I mean, I have agreed with David that this is almost certainly going to last, I think, for the rest of this financial year. Yes, he's nodding. I hope that wasn't news to you. Yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking probably until the end of this financial year.
Will you be ultimately looking to have a full-time
yes.
chief executive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would it be any intention to make David's appointment on a full-time basis rather than current 4 within this period that you just stated?
Well, I might let David chip in here because he...
We're here for just a peaceful...
Just a moment. Okay. Okay, we'll...
And look how they're treating us. Look how they're treating us. They're talking about you mean treating us. I'm suggesting the word, just see up and say, look, these cuts which you're implementing are hurting our kids. Over 30 people just in London have been killed as a result of which are as a result.
Okay. Where were we?
Question about the chief executive and
yes.
yeah.
Right. Yes, I'm sorry about that. Can I start again?
Yes.
Please, yeah.
The position at the moment is that we don't have an absolutely fixed position about how long David will stay, and I think I'd rather keep it that way. And it's not, obviously David has to discuss with the authorities within the GLA. But one thing I would like to say is, even though he is only doing 4 days a week, David's approach or David's interpretation of 4 days a week is probably equivalent to a lot of other people's 6. And I am absolutely satisfied that we are getting an excellent service from David. And indeed, in the relatively short space of time he's been with us, I think he's enabled us to make considerable progress on both our local plan examination in public, on how we're taking forward the HIF bid and how we're taking forward the land assembly.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree here. No issues about either the commitment or the capacity of David, who gives absolutely everything to the job he does. Point is, for a major position at this level, you certainly want a full-time permanent position, which is what you don't have. And that is what I'm trying to draw out as to what is your plan?
And
are you going to have...
And certainly we will not carry on indefinitely with an interim chief executive. I mean, I think a number of the things we're working through at the moment, once we've done those, we will be in a much better position to then go out and recruit a full-time chief executive, particularly since we'll then be moving into a delivery phase rather than a planning and dealing with, a lot of these sort of governmental type challenges. So yes, next year we will at some point, to be specifically determined, be recruiting a full-time chief executive.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the third question, and that's maximising the opportunities of the OPDC. Oh, I am so sorry. No, you're right. Assembly Member Copley.
Quite right. Yes, just a quick one. I wonder if you could update us on the progress you're making towards a new cultural quarter in Old Oak. I believe this was one of the proposals that you had. Is that not right?
Was it? Cultural is certainly one of the potential uses eventually when we actually get to the stage of development. But I think, as I was saying earlier, when I was talking about all the different employment opportunities, we don't have I am not aware of a specific plan. I mean, there was a conversation, I think even before I arrived as chairman, with one of the museums, I can't remember which one, to actually take space there. That, I think, went away because the museum in question, and I can't for the life of me remember which one it was, the V&A or I think it was the Natural History Museum made other plans. But I am very open-minded about the types of activity that we would have on Old Oak, and I don't rule out, museums, culture, anything really.
So it says in your draft local plan, it says the OPDC will work with the GLA, neighbouring local authorities and developers to ensure that cultural provision in the area supports the creation of a new cultural quarter in Old Oak that can complement nearby cultural clusters.
I think that is an aspiration in the same way that I would like to see a sort of spin-off from Imperial on the eastern side of the site. I mean, there are a number of things in Old Oak in Park Royal particularly, where we're keen to build on the heritage. There's some very, very interesting older businesses there. I mentioned earlier there's a fabulous stained glass business there, and the owner of that would actually like to create a whole exhibition and enlarged studio. There is potential for bringing in perhaps a museum. I have had interesting discussions over the last couple of years with the Museum of London. Why don't we have a Museum of London West? They've got one in the east as well as their central site. I think there's a lot of heritage to build on from the railways in the area. A lot of the architecture is railway inspired and railway dominated. So there's plenty of potential. So yes, that remains one of our aspirations, but we do not have a specific plan at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Third question, and you've been patiently waiting, Assembly Member Devonish. Let's have your question.
Good afternoon. How can the Mayor and the Government help sell OPDC to sovereign wealth funds with the necessary long-term perspective to unlock billions of pounds and then therefore tens of thousands of jobs by the mid-2020s? I.e., if we are genuinely Europe's largest regeneration project, aren't we really doing it on the cheap at the moment?
Well, we certainly have been doing it on the cheap because we haven't really had a meaningful capital budget, and happily that's beginning to change now with the HIF allocation. And I think that's really important because unless there is some credibility behind, if you like, the public sector offer to start to acquire the land and deliver the infrastructure, then sovereign wealth funds or any other investment fund is going to be, I think, pretty slow at coming forward for a project which is, you know, pretty long-term and pretty risky without a strong public sector commitment. Because we're through that, or we're nearly through that stage, and hopefully very soon we will have a strong planning position and we will have the HIF funding in place and we will start to bring the Phase 1A development forward. I think this starts to become a very marketable proposition indeed, because as we all know, large strategic sites with excellent transport infrastructure in this capital city do not come along very often. And Old Oak is, I wouldn't say unique, but is very, very unusual because at the moment there are no major development interests there. I think whether the ultimate solution to bringing in large-scale, long-term equity and project finance into the regeneration of Old Oak, whether that is strictly speaking sovereign wealth money or whether that comes from other quarters, I'm completely open-minded about. You know, we've seen sovereign wealth money moving into some of the major regeneration sites in London from overseas. Indeed, you know, this is quite a good example of London City development with Qatari money. On the other hand, you know, I think there are plenty of opportunities at Old Oak for more domestic funds and domestic partners. I think there may well be some interesting opportunities for major housing associations and others. So personally, I'm pretty kind of open-minded to who comes in, so long as they're going to be trusted partners, so long as they're in for the long term, and so long as, most importantly, they share the kind of vision that we've been talking about this morning for really, really high quality growth and a commitment to doing this thing in the best possible way. But as I say, how much of that money comes from overseas and how much of that money comes domestically, I think I'm pretty open-minded about.
And in terms of the Mayor's ambitions, I hardly ever hear, in fact I don't think I've ever heard the Mayor talk about this project in the way he talks about other things. Do you think there is a poverty of ambition? It's not really the Mayor's top 1, 2, 3, 4 or even top 20 projects at the moment, and how can you make that the case? Because he doesn't seem to ever show any real interest in this. You're almost like a football team that hasn't got 11 members in it, and I think, David, the question's about you, weren't you personally, it's the fact you haven't got a very substantial team in size to pump prime a project of this size.
Well, I mean, Liz and I spent an hour and a quarter with the Mayor a couple of weeks ago to, you know, really get him properly briefed and up to speed, and you know, I think that's an indication of how much interest he's taking in the project. You know, getting an hour and a quarter of FaceTime just specifically talking about this.
To interrupt, I actually asked him, you know, I said, you know, I need to know you want this to happen, and he was absolutely clear that he is fully behind this, he wants this to happen, he's enthusiastic about it. And that's why he detailed off his budget folk, his finance people, to make sure that we got what we needed to do the work on, to move forward the work on the HIF implementation. Sorry, I interrupted you. But
exactly
I think
the point,
yeah.
really, and I think, you know, the fact that he, you know, has obviously been very clear that he wants us to press on at pace with our plans, and is willing to recommend and approve additional funding to enable us to do that. I think it's an indication of the fact that there's strong mayoral support for this particular project, and I'm pretty confident too that, you know, as we get through the process of nailing down the draft plan and it becomes adopted and drawing down the HIF funding, I'm very confident that Old Oak will emerge as a much higher profile project for London generally.
And you touched on a couple of times now the meeting you've had with the Mayor's finance team. Can you tell us any more detail of exactly what they said to you?
No, I don't think. No, well, I don't think there's a great deal more to be said until you see the mayoral direction, which I understand under your processes and procedures will be available as soon as the mayor has signed it. So keeping our fingers crossed. I mean, what we did, we went in and we explained to him how we thought the HIF process was likely to pan out, what we actually needed over the next 3 to 6 months while we nailed the HIF bid. Needless to say, the finance folk were very robust in quizzing us about this because they wanted to make sure that this was, you know, a sensible investment of their money. It will, in due course, provided all goes well on HIF, actually be refunded from the HIF money when we actually get it. But, you know, again, they wanted to interrogate us on the certainties of that, and on the back of that, they and David's finance team went away to draw up the details of the mayoral direction.
Okay, I won't go back to Car Giant and the ransom strip discussion at this meeting now, but what I would say is I think it would help if you could certainly, in the near future, write to the Assembly with what is Plan B if that does go on. We all know a CPO process is going to go on if it does happen to be a CPO process for at least, let's say, a large part of the next mayoral term. So it would be nice to know what is Plan B if you have to go down that long and protracted process. Because, you know, I think the point that the industry is making, and you know as well as I do at the moment, is I think, and often a lot of that Assembly member Copley's points I disagree with on one basis. I don't believe land values are going to keep going up. And I do think a lot of the discussions we have at the moment are based on the public sector, and land values can keep on subsidising more and more public sector projects. I don't believe it's going to happen. So I'd like to understand what is Plan B, particularly in terms of this particular ransom strip going forward. Will you be able to mull that over and perhaps write to us in due course?
We will do that.
Yep.
Great.
And this is obviously going to be a major question in front of the planning inspector at the EIP hearing on the 18th of July. So very happy to report back on that with more information in due course.
Thank you. And can you just finally, you may want to write to me again, in terms of, I appreciate this is an industrial project as well as not just being resi units, as much of the rest of our obsession in this building rightly is about. But can you just remind me, what is the figure by, say, 2024 of the number of residential units you at the moment are committed to build out?
By 2024?
By the end of the next mayoral term. 5 years' time.
Okay. I mean, I'm very happy to drop you a note on that.
Great. I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Conservatives are the only group with time. Do I see any questions? No questions? Okay. Well, can I thank you, Liz and David, for your full and informative answers that you've given us here today. There were a couple of points where members have asked for follow-up information. That will be sent through to my office and then distributed to all. And leaves me to wish you well in the next phase of this remarkable development that you're both heading. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to agree no, it's not agenda.
I'll just check the motion on the agenda.
Sorry. Yeah, to agree the motion set out in my name, namely that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Then, Section 5, petitions. Can I ask Assembly Member Shaw to present the petition listed on the agenda in his name?
Agree.
Thank you, Chair. The petition is for step-free access at Wilston Green Station, promoted by Wilston Green Access Group, and it's been signed off by Janice Long, who's local councillor. It's a long prayer. I'll just read out the important bit, which is the action sought from the Mayor and Brent Council. It says, we urge the Mayor and TfL to prioritize a lift at this station by undertaking a new cost-state feasibility study, looking at an alternative lift and bridge across the Jubilee Line platforms from Station Parade. Also, we request the Mayor to prioritize the step-free access by including it in TfL's next business plan and work with Brand Council to establish third-party funding through funding raised from Section 106 and community infrastructure levy requirements and development of TfL and land assets in Brent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to forward the petition to the Mayor in his capacity as Chair of Transport for London? Agreed. Thank you. Can I now ask members to receive... have we got papers to distribute?
The one's gone round, the rest are going now, Chair.
Okay, so members have got papers of amendments for motions, and are there any other papers to be circulated? Let's get the papers circulated first. We have 7 motions today, and I believe 2 amendments.
I think we should. I think we should.
I've just heard you. No, you won't. Okay.
Give us office. Oh, we've got yours as well. Say so. I do not accept. Signalling.
That's everything, Chair.
Okay, members, you have a great deal of paper in front of you, and for the motions that have been amended, I'm happy to give a few more minutes for you to read through the amendments.
She's amended her own motion, hasn't she? I do know that. I will glare at them.
Okay, there's the first one.
We first missed that one. So we've got
Yeah.
Keith and Steve to do them second.
Okay. Okay.
About the procedure for the fact that the Greens have amended their motion, but we still have a Labour amendment. So that was just, it'd be really helpful to have a point of clarification around that, Chair.
Very happy to do so, Chair. Assembly members, as you all know, may alter their own motion with the consent of the meeting, signified without discussion. Once Assembly Member Russell moves that alteration, that becomes the motion upon the table for discussion. Any amendment is taken to be an amendment to that version. So effectively it would be cumulative to that version.
So Assembly Member Cooper could then give that orally.
Exactly so. So the assumption will be that your amendment becomes an amendment to that altered version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you happy, Assembly Member Russell? You know what's going to happen.
I know what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay. Lovely. Let's start with the motions then. Motion 6.1 is in the name of Assembly Member Prince. Can I ask you to move your motion? And there is an amendment going around. Just indicate to us whether you're willing to accept that or not.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm not prepared to accept the amendment. I think it's a crying shame that once again the Labour Party have chosen to try and politicise an issue which is a grave issue where a number of Londoners died. I think it is disgraceful, actually, that they're trying to work against the GMB, who are protecting their members, whose one of members actually died on that tram. The GMB have called for an independent investigation, and by making their amendment, they are completely letting the Mayor off the hook. And this would allow him not to actually appoint an independent investigation. I think it's disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. I will do my speech as I'm going to. There's no politics in it at all. It was purely about trying to get to the bottom of what went wrong on this issue. I actually do believe it's quite probable that it's cock up, but when things like this happen, when Labour come up and get the Mayor off the hook, then clearly there's more to be seen, and this makes it even more obvious that there's something to hide. It's terrible, really terrible. Anyway, I'll do my speech. It won't take more than 5 minutes. So today I put to you a motion calling upon the Mayor to appoint an independent investigation to review why TfL failed to supply critical tram safety evidence to the Croydon tram crash investigator, the Office of Road and Rail and the British Transport Police following the Sandilands tram crash. Many of you may find it strange that someone who sits on the right of the Conservative Party would be here today putting forward a motion based on a motion from GMB Union. But the reality is that they are raising the same concerns as we have in the past too, both of which stem from the great work done by tireless volunteer safety campaigner Tom Carney. More importantly, I believe this issue goes beyond politics. It is not just about ensuring that everything possible is done to understand what went wrong on that dreadful day, but discovering and understanding what other factors could or may have contributed to this tragedy, and what lessons can be learned from the future. We have all heard numerous versions as to who asked who to do what when, different reasons as to why the report was not presented and until as late as it was, but that cannot be good enough. In reality, we do not know whether it was cock-up or conspiracy, and that simply cannot be accepted. We need a definitive answer to these and many more questions, and we need a truly independent inquiry into this matter so it stops all the speculation around it. Thank you.
Okay, can I have Assembly Member O'Connell to second the motion?
I'll formally second and reserve my right to speak.
So, formally second. Okay. Can I call upon Assembly Member Twycross to move the amendment that she's circulated?
Okay, thank you. I think I find it deeply regrettable that we couldn't get agreement on an amendment that everybody could support. Londoners will never forget the Croydon train derailment, which saw the loss of 7 lives and 72 people injured. The tragic incident will forever act as a painful and important reminder of the need to keep safety on all forms of transport in the capital the highest priority. And when in the shadow of that awful event at Sandilands, a further incident concerning driver fatigue was reported at Church Street, it was vital that swift and appropriate action was taken, and TfL undertook those necessary extra steps. It therefore seems somewhat distasteful that colleagues on the other side of the chamber are using something so serious, a tragedy, for what I would only deem political game playing. I think the game's being played on the other side. This is not normally how this body would conduct itself in a matter in which people remain in a state of grief over this tragedy. We know that of their own instigation, TfL commissioned an internal audit to examine the effectiveness of fatigue management processes at the tram operators' first group. We know that they immediately notified the Rail Accident Investigation Branch and the Office for Rail and Road. We know that they also made the British Transport Police, who are still carrying out an investigation, aware, so that their family liaison officers could sensitively bring this incident to the attention of the victims and families of those who'd lost their lives in the Sandilands incident. Of course, as all politicians and public services worth their salt should know, there were always lessons to be learnt from these events, and it's clear and understandable that this is the message from the GMB, particularly if you read the full motion. TfL have rightly held their hands up and conceded that this audit should have been immediately sent to investigators and the regulator. That this didn't happen was the result of human error, and I think Assembly Member Prince has noted that it is probable it is a cock-up. And TfL took immediate action to rectify this. GMB's motion acknowledged the openness and transparency shown by TfL at this time. And GMB's motion included far more than that being cherry-picked here by the Conservative group to suit their shallow agenda. Had members opposite done their research, they would be aware that the lead investigator publicly stated that had they received this information sooner, it would have made no difference to their conclusions regarding the Sandilands incident. TfL has subsequently changed their procedures to ensure that any audit of material importance to a live investigation is flagged and automatically forwarded to the investigators and regulator. With that in mind, we seek to amend this motion to put on record our agreement with the GMB that there were serious questions to answer with regards to the Croydon tram crash, that those questions are being addressed by TfL and investigators, and that the GMB should be made fully aware of these findings by TfL and the Mayor. The motion in its original form put forward by the Conservative group is deeply flawed, potentially misleading and potentially hurtful to those affected. At the best, this is a result of their ignorance. After all, TfL has explained at length and publicly the reason for this serious oversight. At worst, it's political opportunism in its most vile form, latching on to serious events which saw the loss of human life. As such, we will not support it as it stands, and we seek to amend as stated. Thank you.
Thank you. Under Standing Order 4.4, a member has requested a point of personal explanation. If you can give it quickly.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Appreciated.
Without answering any of the other points, in her opening remarks, the Assembly Member Twycross said it's a shame that we haven't been able to reach agreement on this. At no point has Fiona Twycross approached me in any way to see if we could find a way of an agreement. So that's very misleading, because no attempt has been made to come to any kind of agreement.
Thank you very much. No. The member has asked me under section 4.4. He's raised it. He's made his comment. If you at this time want to... And in what way? And he named you, so we can go on like this for the rest of the day. And just let me put on record that members, it's by good practice and the way that we respect each other that we inform each other of amendments. There is no requirement for a member putting an amendment to be informed by a mover of an amendment.
Yes, I was made aware of the amendment. I'm not accusing you of that. I'm saying that at no point did Fiona Twycross, Assemblymember Twycross, approach me personally to see if there was any form of negotiation.
Okay. And yes, and we're just like now going to get into picking up a spot and making it into a real big saw. Can I just ask members to just, let's move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
She didn't approach the mover of the motion, who has just said he wasn't approached and has clarified that. Right, if you want to approach me and raise a point of personal explanation, quoting section 4.4, just so we can have some order in this debate, I'm happy to hear you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to clarify that although I didn't directly approach Keith Prince, I was approached by another member of the group at the beginning of the meeting, and so I've been discussing this issue with another member of the Conservative group, who is named as a seconder throughout this morning. And actually, I felt that Keith Prince, Assemblymember Prince, was misleading in the way that he implied that I had not been trying to resolve this in advance.
And all I can say is that's just distracted us from a motion about a very important matter.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Londoners,
I agree.
So can we move on? And now, can I hear the seconder for this Labour amendment to Assemblymember Prince's motion? Okay. Right. Members for the debate? Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to support this motion. Indeed, it's an issue that I have been looking into for a long period of time, and I have asked extensive mayoral questions on this subject. And I'm really pleased this year that the Transport Committee is looking into bus and tram safety, because it's a very important area. But this motion relates to TfL's failure to hand over its audit report on fatigue management at a critical time. And although RAIB finally received this report, this was too late to incorporate into their investigation, though, as we've heard, they have said it wouldn't materially have changed their report. Their report into the tragic Sandilands crash was concluded and published in December 2017, but TfL only sent on its fatigue audit report in February 2018. It's also my understanding that a former TfL board member asked TfL senior officers for assurances that this important report had been sent to RAIB and was given assurances that it had, but then it turned out not to be the case. And one of my mayoral answers shows that TfL put down the failure to immediately share this report as an administrative error. And we know mistakes are indeed made, but when it comes to something so critical around health and safety issues, I don't feel that this vague description is good enough. So I do think we need a clear explanation as to how TfL has operated, and that is needed. And I do worry that this reflects something potentially in TfL's culture in terms of how it addresses concerns that are raised by TfL board members, but also how health and safety concerns raised by staff and the public are addressed. And I think the process needs to be clear, it needs to change, and I do worry about some areas of TfL, and we've seen this elsewhere, whether it's the Garden Bridge, whether it's Crossrail. So I welcome and congratulate the Assemblymember Prince on putting forward this motion. I'm sorry it has turned into this tense discussion this afternoon, but I would like to say that more praise I think needs to go to those tireless campaigners out there, including Tom Carney, the GMB, and also those board members who are willing to ask those difficult questions. Now, in terms of the amendment, if it had said "and" instead of "or" in the fourth line, I'd be very happy to support it, but it doesn't, so I won't be supporting that. But I will be supporting however the motion is going forward for the final vote.
Okay, thank you. So, no other speakers. So let's... we've got 2 reserved rights. So can I have Assemblymember Echeloni to speak on the amendment?
Yeah, just to say, Chair, that this isn't an issue that we are looking at on the Transport Committee, as Assemblymember Pigeon mentioned. And I think because the investigation is still ongoing, this is a bit premature on this motion. As a proud member of the GMB, I'm happy that they have brought this forward and they continue to bring safety issues to the Mayor's attention and the Deputy Mayor for Transport's attention. But I think we have to be mindful of the fact that there are bereaved families, and what we're discussing in this chamber will be very difficult for them. So we have to make sure that we're discussing facts and not cherry picking which parts of that motion which we want to discuss this afternoon. One of the things we will be doing on the back of our bus and tram investigation is writing a response to the Mayor, and I'm hoping that a number of these issues will be picked up. So again, I would ask members to support this amendment so that we can get clear consensus on something that is really, really important to Londoners. Thank you.
Assemblymember O'Connell, you reserved your right.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This has all turned into a rather unseemly debate this morning, with language on both sides that I think is regrettable, and I find that upsetting. Okay. Caroline has quite rightly pointed out the salient issues here around the lack of release of vital information. Caroline's put that very, very well. And I think there is a place for that to be looked into, and I think that is absolutely correct. That's why I was happy to second it in the first place. It is a great regret, though, however, that this morning we haven't been able to come to a meeting of minds on this tragic incident, despite best efforts from both of us this morning. And I regret that as well. 7 lives were lost. It's nearly 3 years ago, and that pain is still felt by people in New Addington, very much so. But there are questions to be answered, and I think the motion, as moved, raised that quite properly. I think it's correct. I regret that anyone on either side is suggesting there's any politics at play here, and if they had the opportunity to withdraw any of those points, I wish they would, but there probably won't be that opportunity. However, I do second the original motion, as committed, and I would ask colleagues to support it, if nothing else, to put to bed any suggestion that there was any real problems around process. There obviously was poor process, hence there wouldn't have been the investigation in the first place, hence there wouldn't have been the omissions in releasing the information. That needs to be settled independently to say that was an absolute cock-up, which I believe it was, and while I've got the opportunity, I'd like to thank those 2 3/4 years ago officers and senior officers of TfL and other public service officers that supported the families and victims at that time. Many officers of TfL did a grand job at that time. This is no critique of those good people. It's just to settle an outstanding worry and problem. And so therefore I do formally, again, second the original motion, Chair.
Okay. Assemblymember Tykos, your summation. Assemblymember Prince, your summation.
Thank you. This is a very serious issue, and I think there is an opportunity for us to come together and to find a compromise. And I would suggest that the compromise is that in the motion where it says calls upon the Mayor to appoint an independent investigation, the Labour amendment puts in the word or, which Assemblymember Pigeon says is a sticking point. If the Labour Party are prepared to amend that to and, then I would be more than happy to accept the amendment, and I suspect that other members would too. Well, there you are. There you have it, Chair. That's one word, and that shows you the cynicism that we have here today, because that word lets the Mayor off the hook and completely negates what the GMB are trying to do. But thankfully, I don't have to answer to the GMB. Thank you.
Okay, can we see those in favour of the amendment?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in favour of the amendment, Chair.
8 in favour of the amendment. Can I see those against the amendment?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 against, Chair.
10 against the amendment falls.
Vote on the substantive
Can
motion.
I see those in favour of the substantive motion?
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Chair.
10 in favour of the substantive motion. Can I see those against?
And no votes against, Chair.
And no votes against. So the substantive motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to motion 6.2. Can I call upon Assembly Member Pigeon to move? Is there a name on it? No. No. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The reason for this motion is quite simple. Crossrail 2 is desperately needed to ensure passengers can move around our city in the years to come. And we need to ensure that it is built, and that means the areas of land are safeguarded, both in London but also in Surrey and Hertfordshire, along the route where Crossrail 2 is likely to run. And Assembly members who attended the recent briefing on Crossrail 2 have heard from Michelle Dix, the director of the project, how important this is. And of course, talking about Crossrail 2 when Crossrail is not even completed and open might seem somewhat indulgent. But we should never forget that Crossrail took to get to the construction stage and to get the finance in place. It actually started back in 1974 when Edward Heath was replaced by Harold Wilson as Prime Minister and Richard Nixon stood down as US President over Watergate. So these projects take a very long time, so we need to press ahead with Crossrail 2. But planning for this is vital, and if we don't start to secure the route now, then we're storing up huge problems for the future. At least 17 of our tube stations, especially on the Northern Line, will have to introduce crowd controls. Overcrowding at Waterloo Station will be intolerable, as will Clapham Junction Station. And by 2031, standing levels on the South West Main Line outer services are projected to rise to levels not seen on any mainline national rail services on the network today, up to 35% of passengers standing in the peak hour. That is not good enough for our city. So Crossrail 2 is absolutely critical. It's also critical for the success of High Speed 2. There's no point getting to London in record time and then being trapped at overcrowded stations. It makes no sense. And these aren't scare stories, but a reasonable expectation looking at passenger numbers and expected growth. But along the route, there have been many speculative planning applications, including particularly issues in the Broxbourne area, and these will only get worse, and vital sites will be developed, adding to the costs and complexity of this project. Without safeguarding in place, local authorities have no information on which to rely in order for them to refuse or impose conditions on planning permissions for sites which are needed for Crossrail 2. Now, the government, in a recent reply to a parliamentary question, said they would not safeguard the route until they've made a decision on the project. Well, time is up. We need the green light for Crossrail 2 now, and the route safeguarded so we can build this vital project. We can't afford to waste any more time. Please support the motion.
Thank you. And can I call on, Assembly Member Eshaloma to second the motion? Oh, sorry, before. Can I ask, in accordance with Standing Orders 2.9, for the Assembly to agree to extend the meeting to finish the business? That's all 7 motions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Got 7 motions. I'll keep it brief. Just to reiterate our support for this motion and not to go over some of the points Assembly Member Pigeon outlined, but the reality is this motion lays bare the reality of what would happen to the transport infrastructure in London without the support for Crossrail 2. But there's no focus or urgency from this government on this or any other transport projects, or indeed any other domestic projects in London, because everything's been crowded out by Brexit and this very long leadership contest. Thankfully, the ballot papers have dropped today, so hopefully get voting, guys. We know that in December 2017, the DfT announced the independent finance review of the project. And while London and London's businesses have shown it can pay for half of this scheme, they also wanted to see how the other half would be paid for, especially during the construction. The independent affordability review gave the government until summer 2018, and this was due to respond back in autumn 2018. But this was delayed. We still, to date, don't have no spending review, and the spending review, we don't know when that will happen. The government are refusing to publish or respond to this in any way, and that is really bad. Instead, they keep hiding behind the delays of the spending review. They're also refusing to update on the safeguarding directions. And we need to make sure that we continue to press the government on this. It may seem like we keep rehearsing and keep bringing discussions around Crossrail 2 to this Assembly, but if we as the Assembly do not continue to push and fly that flag, no one else will. We continue to call on the Mayor to make sure that he's working and pushing the government to get the funding and clarity on when Crossrail 2 will be progressing. Thank you.
Any speakers? Let's go to the vote. Those in favour of this motion?
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Unanimous.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Sorry, apologies, Chair. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 in favour, Chair.
Okay, motion is passed. Motion 3.
Did you want to take those against, Chair?
Was it? Sorry, I thought that was unanimous. No, those against. Okay. No votes against. Okay, motion 6.3. Can I call upon Assembly Member Cooper to move the motion?
Thank you, Chair.
We've
We've been doing a lot of work in this building on plastics since the beginning of 2017. The Environment Committee produced its report on single-use plastic water bottles in April 2017, and after that the Mayor decided to adopt some of our recommendations and has picked up the ball very, very strongly around the concept of refill water points across London, or drinking fountains if you prefer, and has been working with London Zoo and has been working with Refill London and has also been working with Thames Water to get them installed so that Londoners can free themselves from the need to use unreusable plastic water bottles while they're on the go, and to move over to using reusable bottles. And we've done that because we know that there are 8 million plastic bottles that end up in the ocean all the time. I mean, it's just an absolute plague. In the river here, the flounder are filled with plastic, and the more that we even go to the bottom of the oceans, the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the deep ocean, there is plastic there. So we really need to step up and do something about this, and public awareness around plastic pollution has massively increased because of David Attenborough's Blue Planet programme. However, the government has been consulting. They've brought out a 25-year environment strategy, and they have also recently been consulting over a forthcoming resources and waste policy. And talking about extended producer responsibility, which I think is absolutely essential, but we also need to encourage companies to move away from using plastics. So one of the things that this motion is saying is, we need both a carrot and stick approach. The carrot is obviously that telling people about the problems caused by plastic, but if people are still going to insist on using it, then actually we should have a tax on all single-use plastic. And I think we should also ban single-use non-recyclable hot drinks cups. There is no need to have these anymore. There are so many alternatives. And we also think that the Mayor, who didn't adopt one of the proposals, one of our recommendations in the report that came out in April 2017, which was that we should have a pilot in London for a deposit return scheme, There's so much work been done on this. It's implemented widely across the rest of the world. It's all over Europe. It's really easy. The government is talking about it not just for plastics, but also for other objects as well. You know, let's have a trial in London of a deposit return scheme so that we can prove that in operation that it's the great thing that we know that it is elsewhere. You know, even if you don't want to recycle your bottle, if it's got a deposit on it, somebody else will recycle it for you because they want the 50 pence or the pound or the 10 pence or whatever the figure is. We know that it works for plastic bags. We know that 85% reduction in use of plastic bags. You know, we need to step up, and the Mayor needs to be very strong with government and ask that we are designated as a pilot city for the deposit return scheme. And I hope you support the call for a tax on all single-use plastic and a ban for single-use non-recyclable hot coffee cups. Thank you.
Okay. Second, Assembly Member McCartney.
Formally.
Okay. Assembly Member Whittle.
Assembly Member Russell.
Oh, sorry. Assembly Member Russell was in front of you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Assemblymember Cooper for bringing this motion today. There is a growing awareness of the enormous problem of single-use plastics and the threat they pose to our ecosystems, our wildlife, and ultimately, of course, to ourselves. Disposable plastic bottles and drinks cups are something we should urgently be moving away from, as well as eliminating less visible plastics from our daily lives, such as those found in the various unflushable single-use plastic products that find their ways to our beaches, our waterways, and our sewers. We've seen, as Assemblymember Cooper said, the single-use plastic bag charge lead to a dramatic fall in single-use plastic bags, and it's accepted now as a logical thing across the retail sector. Eliminating these single-use plastic items requires national action, so it's right that the Assembly calls on the Mayor to lobby government to introduce a tax on single-use plastic items and a ban on single-use non-recyclable coffee cups. And given Londoners consume more plastic bottled water per person than anywhere else in England, and London has some of the worst recycling rates in the UK, it makes absolute sense for London to be a pilot city for the forthcoming plastic bottle deposit return scheme. We declared a climate emergency in this chamber in December of last year, and that means we have to take bold action like this. I commend Assemblymember Cooper for bringing this motion, and on behalf of the City Hall Greens, I support it enthusiastically and urge all of you here to do so.
Assembly Member Whittle, were you
Yes, thank you,
indicating?
Madam Chairman. Yes, I would also like to speak in support of Leonie's motion, Assembly Member Cooper's motion. I think this is a growing and appalling problem. Just a couple of things. Also, I'd echo your comments as well, Caroline, but I think we've got to keep the pressure up on manufacturers and supermarkets and people. You know, two of my household, staples is mayonnaise and tomato ketchup. Both used to be, no, seriously, both used to be in bottles, in jars. Absolutely recyclable, can be used again in the home for no reason other than pure money, for profit, whatever. They're now all in plastic and you can't get them in glass. There's no reason, for that. We should keep the pressure up there. One thing I would say, though, Leonie, is that you mentioned that, people quite rightly sort of cheered David Attenborough to the rafters, at Glastonbury as well. But when you look at what the aftermath of Glastonbury was this year, it was a mountain of plastic containers and detritus. So I think amongst the very people I think who would consider themselves to be eco-friendly. But I think that the message you're putting out is the right one for me, so I support the motion.
Any other speakers? Okay, can we see those in favour of the motion? Oh, sorry. Assembly Member McCartney. And back to Steve. Sorry.
No, I was voting.
Oh, you were voting.
Sorry.
Okay, and I wouldn't wish to deny Assembly Member Cooper her right to submit.
Just very, very briefly to say I really welcome the contributions from Assemblymember Russell and Assemblymember Whittle, and I think Assemblymember Whittle is quite right to point to both what manufacturers can do and the big companies. Why do people keep moving things out of glass and into plastic? It actually makes it really difficult for consumers. But then there is also the consumer choice when you can find the products that are in the glass bottles instead, which is widely recycled. I don't know of a single London borough that doesn't recycle. Or if it's in a plastic that can be recycled, at least that's slightly better. But it's much better not to put it in the plastic in the first place. That's what we really want. And we're standing ready in London, I think, if we're all going to support this, to have a trial for deposit return, to really, if we can do it here, I think other cities in the rest of the country can do it, and we ought to be stepping up for the reason that Assemblymember Russell pointed out, which is that we've been pretty bad about dropping our plastic rubbish around the place, so we need to be the first probably to try this and stop it. Thank you.
Those in favour of the motion, please show.
Is unanimous.
Good, excellent. Now go to the motion in the name of Assemblymember Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, this motion is about the Assembly showing its support for hard-working police officers who are protecting Londoners. As the motion makes clear, 2018 was another demanding year for police officers in London. Crime is rising in London, as it is rising across England and Wales. And we had yet another fatal stabbing in Battersea just yesterday. The complexity of crime is increasing as well. Last week, the Commissioner Cressida Dick delivered the keynote speech at the Police Foundation's John Harris Memorial Lecture. She said that the police would need more resources, better technology, and greater skills to tackle rises in crime and improve the sanction detection rate. Despite these pressures, government cuts have meant the Met has had to make £850 million in savings in recent years, with more than £250 million still to come. We cannot take £1 billion out of the police budget and not expect it to make a difference. This government cuts means police officer numbers have fallen. In 2010, the Met had just over 33,000 officers when London had a population of 8 million. We now have fewer than 30,000 officers for a population of just under 9 million. This means that police officers are having to do more than before. Rest days are being cancelled and officers are taking overtime to keep us safe. This motion therefore what it aims to do is recognize the contribution that our officers are making to keep us safe. Metropolitan Police officers protect us day in, day out, and deserve to be rewarded with a pay package that reflects the indispensable nature of the job that they do. Last year, the Independent Police Pay Remuneration Review Body called for a 3% rise for police officers. The government blocked this and offered a 2% pay rise. Police officers cannot go on strike to argue for fairer pay. The Independent Police Pay Remuneration Body is just that, independent. It was created to help ensure officers get a fair pay rise. And yet last year, sad to say, it was ignored by the government. It is not fair, it is not good enough. This has led to the unprecedented act of the Police Federation, taking the government to court to challenge this decision. The principle of policing by consent implies a contract between the public and our police who keep criminals off our streets. We ask police officers to take on a unique role and face up to challenges and situations that few of us will be prepared to deal with in our working lives. Part of that contract is that the public expects a well-remunerated, properly equipped police force who can see the value placed on their work. Yet police pay has been cut in real terms and no extra funding has been given to the Met by the government to support rises in police pay. The message officers received from the government instead in recent years is clear: tighten your belts and get on with the job. Last year, the Assembly came together to call for a fair rise for police officers' pay, and hope we'll come together again today and support this motion, which shows the Assembly believes central government should give police officers a fair pay rise and provide the Met with the funding to deliver this. If you value our police officers, our police service, then let us make sure they're fairly paid. Colleagues, I urge you to support this motion.
Second, Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. We've just heard that our police officers deserve the pay for the hard work that they do, and I agree that this is a really important focus that we should all support. It takes a huge toll on our officers, who are often the first to arrive on the scenes of many of these fatal attacks that we've been seeing reported. When we went on a visit to Brixton Police Station, we heard how police officers are having to sit through hours sifting through computer images just to gather the evidence to bring the prosecutors To have your rest day and your annual leave cancelled in under 24 hours notice and you might have family plans, you might have arranged to go and see loved ones, you might have additional care responsibilities. This is the reality of what our police officers are facing. In February 2019, the Police Federation released the details and results of Demand, Pay and Capacity Welfare Survey. The results across England and Wales show that almost 9 out of 10 officers say that there is not enough of them to meet the demands that they are facing, and almost 8 out of 10 officers say that their stress and anxiety levels has gone up within the past 12 months. How can we expect officers to work under those circumstances? If you look at the results for London, 73% of our officers have said that there aren't enough officers to manage the demands faced by their team and unit. And again, on our visit to Brixton Police Station not too long ago, we heard the reality of that facing some of the officers. The workload is getting very high. Crime is getting more complex. The number of voluntary police officer resignations across the Met has grown since 2010. Only 224 officers took voluntary redundancy in 2010, but by 2017, that figure had doubled to almost 653. This should send alarm bells ringing. On the one hand, we're encouraging for more people to join the police, but on the other hand, we are seeing people actually wanting to leave much earlier. That should be quite worrying for us. The Met are working hard to try and give this support to their officers, with Cressida and the leadership team saying that, but the reality is the stress and the strain on the officers are evident to see. And it's good that, politicians from all sides want to support our police officers, but those warm words will be no comfort to our officers who are feeling the strain. We need to see central government putting its money where its mouth is. Last year's pay settlement was not good enough, and we need to make sure that we're working harder to get that increase for our officers. If officers don't continue to get paid properly, we will see those vacancies increasing, and this will have a big impact on Londoners. This year we celebrate 100 years of women joining the Met Police, and we want to see more women coming forward. But with situations that I've just outlined, is this a career that any woman would want to join? It's important that our officers get the pay and the leave that they deserve, and I urge all of you to support this motion. Thank you.
Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add my support to this motion, and I'm very glad to see that it flags up the impact of officers' pay on the ability of the Met to recruit and retain staff in the context of the rising cost of living, particularly for housing. The issue of housing for our emergency services is something I've raised regularly as Mayor's questions. I did a report in 2016. This was followed by the Harris Review, raising it as one of its first recommendation. That officers need to be able to live close to where they work in order to be most effective, both in terms of having a real connection with the communities that they serve, but also in order to cut response times in the event of major incidents. Now, from what I can see about the responses that I've had to my MQs, 2 years after we first raised them, nearly 3 years getting on since the Harris Review, nothing much has changed. We still have a situation where about half of our police officers live outside of Greater London. Only 9% of them last year lived in the borough where they worked. And this is almost entirely an issue caused by the cost of housing. It's having a detrimental effect on our police officers and the job they're able to do. So I would ask the Mayor again on the recommendations, to act on the recommendations of the Harris report and make sure that we're providing more housing for them, but action on the pay that they receive is incredibly important if we're trying to recruit people who currently live in London, who are currently managing to pay the rents that are faced by people living in London, and trying to get them to take on a public service career. If we're not paying our public servants what they deserve, then the communities that they do serve will suffer. Thank you.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the outset of what I am about to say, I should point out that I have close friends and relatives who are serving police officers, but that doesn't have a bearing on what I'm about to say, which is that we will be supporting this motion. It seems entirely correct to me. We're about to change the leadership of the government, and I think it's an opportune moment for the Assembly to put a marker down in terms of where we would like to see policing in our city and in our country going forward. The police are hard pressed, everybody knows that, that's perfectly true. Crime is more complex, there's more reported crime now than there has been for many, many years. So the police there's a danger of overstretch. And I think the key part of the motion for me, which I particularly support, is the element that the government should fully fund any cost of a pay rise. Because, of course, if the government being the predominant funder of the Metropolitan Police, if a pay rise is mandated by the government and isn't funded by them, then the perverse outcome of that would be that there will be fewer police officers in the future. They'll be better paid, but there'll be fewer of them, and that will just increase the strains that they have. So we will be supporting this. We think it's the right way forward, and hopefully it will get unanimous support from the Assembly.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not there. Assembly Member Desai, summation?
Fine.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Can we go to the vote? Those in favour of this motion?
Yeah, that is unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Motion 6.5 in the name of Assembly Member Dr. Saholter.
Thank you, Chair. I move this motion. The reason I do this is because London does worse than the rest of the country on the MMR vaccination rates. The rates in London is that 77.8% of the children are vaccinated with the 2 doses, and compared to 87.2% in the rest of England. Vaccination is very important. It's not only important for the person who's been vaccinated, but for the rest of the community also. And that is referred to as herd immunity. 95% of the population has to be vaccinated to have effective herd immunity. But unfortunately, none of the boroughs in London reach that. And the take-up rate of the 2 doses between the first and second also falls down. And the critical thing is, why does it happen in London? Why does London do worse than the rest of the country? Yeah. One of the reasons, of course, is that we have a high churn rate of the population, and there's a high movement of patients between one practice and another practice. But on the back of that is that the fact that the public health services have been feeling the brunt of the cuts, so the campaigns by public health authorities have gone down. Local authorities aren't able to put this money, and also our nurses working in our schools and our communities, we have a high vacancy rate for that. So these things have contributed to the high, on top of the high churn-out rate in London. So what we're trying to do in this motion is call upon the mayor to use his good offices to raise this as a profile, to make sure that this is introduced into his early school policies, but also to call upon attention to from the local authorities that they have a huge public health role to play, and also for public health to put out messages so that we can push up the herd immunity. We have had a huge variation across London. We need to address that. And certainly there has been an outbreak of measles vaccinations, of measles infections because of the poor uptake of vaccinations. So that's what the purpose is. But the cuts in public health and the vacancy rate are a critical part of the causes of this happening in London.
Okay. Second, Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank my colleague, Assemblymember Sahota, for proposing this motion, and I'm pleased to be able to second it. I'm particularly pleased to be able to second it as someone who had mumps vaccine been given routinely when I was a child, I'm giving my age away now, would not have developed encephalitis, which is a life-threatening condition that's an inflammation of the brain, which I contracted as a 13-year-old following a mild dose of mumps. This left me struggling with my health for much of the next 10 years, and at times I could hardly imagine getting to the corner shop on my own, let alone getting to stand in a chamber like this to make a speech. I'm one of the fortunate ones. Encephalitis took away my teenage years. It didn't take away my life, and it did not leave me with life-limiting conditions. As I mentioned, I got encephalitis after a mild dose of mumps. The first person I met who had also had it developed it after a mild dose of measles. It's incomprehensible to me that parents are choosing, for misguided but often well-meaning reasons, to ignore the science and not vaccinate their children with MMR, or simply don't understand the dangers of not doing so. This doesn't just risk their own child, but other people and other people's children, and is highly irresponsible. We know there's a range of conditions and impacts from what are sometimes considered mild childhood illnesses, from hearing loss to brain damage to stroke and in some cases death. We also know that the basis of concerns around vaccines in relation to autism have been totally discredited but still persist. I would add that in many other countries, chickenpox is also added to the suite of vaccines given to children, as chickenpox can also lead to significant health impacts, including encephalitis, stroke and death. And one of the reasons given for not having chickenpox vaccination routinely here is the problems with getting the MMR vaccine levels up in the first place. This motion highlights the fact that no borough in London meets the 95% required for herd immunity, and too many boroughs are nowhere near this. This leaves many children and other Londoners who haven't had the vaccination at risk. And we can't just blame the anti-vaxxers for this. Too many people are complacent about the need to increase vaccination levels in this country, too complacent about the potential impact of so-called childhood illnesses. We need a real drive at every single level of government, but properly funded by central government through the public health budget in order to reverse the trend in vaccination uptake. And I'd urge everyone to support this motion to make sure that no child has, like me, to suffer serious complications from entirely preventable illnesses. Thank you.
Okay. Assembly Member Eshalami.
Thank you, Chair. One of the discussions that often comes up on the various, I'm on about 3 mums and toddlers groups, is around the vaccinations.
Eshalami, can you just sit down a moment because we've got an amendment? Sorry. Right, no, it's okay. I do have an amendment. Can I just ask, is the proposer willing to accept the amendment? Okay, thank you. Sorry, Assembly Member.
Assembly Member Boff to move the amendment.
And okay. No.
The motion be moved, then the amendment is moved. So moved and seconded, then the amendment is moved and seconded, then you have one debate.
Yes.
So it should now be Assembly Member Boff.
Yes, and I made the mistake of calling, and I asked her to sit down. And then I asked if they would like to accept the amendment, and they're not going to accept the amendment, so we're back on course now.
So now
Assembly Member Boff to move his amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. We agree with everything you've said, absolutely everything you've said, apart from the fact that you've used this motion as a way to once again just attack the government for the financial decisions that it's had to make as a result of the last time your party was in government. The point, the weakness of that particular paragraph is, first of all, it's a bit of a complaint about there's not enough money for everything. And then you do nothing in the remainder of the motion to say how that should be addressed. So it's just a passing whine rather than a suggestion as to what can be done. And also, you don't provide any evidence for that contention that those economies that have taken place in public health have had that effect. In fact, rather counterintuitively, if we look at world parallels, the richer the country, the more likely parents are to mistrust the MMR vaccine. The highest confidences in MMR vaccines are in places like Bangladesh and in India and sub-Saharan Africa. So this idea that there is some kind of correlation between the amount you spend on this and the MMR take-up is wrong. What the problem has been is that in the wealthier countries and in places like London is that the misinformation and fake news has been spread using things like social networks. And that's the bit we can support. We can support the mayor taking on the job of trying to persuade people that these doubts that have been cast in parents' minds, that they are wrong and that they are false, but not if you're going to use this very important subject as just another swipe against the government. And so that's why we proposed the amendment. We're entirely on side, but I'm afraid we can't support a motion that you're just using as another piece of ordnance to attack the government. Thank you very much.
Okay, seconder of the amendment, Assembly Member Prince.
I so second and reserve my right, Chair. Thank
Reserve your right. Seconder of the...
Do I have a chance to
explain why I'm not accepting the amendment?
No, you come back and with summation.
Okay.
You sum up, don't you?
So it's okay. It's a long morning. Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I agree with Assembly Member Boff in that I'm attached to a number of those social media debates about the fake news. And it's really interesting to see some of the mums who, when we were going through all our NCT classes, very educated, but yet on this subject of vaccination, our chats were often divided on who's been vaccinated and who hasn't. I will confess I'm petrified of needles, but I made sure that both my children were vaccinated. And the 2 kids at nursery that were not did develop measles. And I think the reality is we need to make sure that we're informing parents of the risk against not vaccinating your children. There are life-changing risks to this. So this information needs to get out loud and clear, because there are a number of groups which a number of new mums are involved in, and even mums that aren't, where this fake news and misinformation about vaccination is still swirling. So I'd urge everyone to say that this is a really important issue, and it's about how we protect not just new mums, but wider family members as well. And if your child isn't vaccinated and develops this, there's issues and risks to elderly parents in terms of people who may have low immune system. You know, there are those risks as well, risks to other children if your child is attending nursery and school. So this isn't about just the risks of the individual child, but the wider community. So it's important that we all get behind this motion and support it as it stands.
Okay, any other speakers? Right. Assembly Member Boff, do you have anything more to add in summation?
Not from what's been commented, no.
Okay, Assembly Member Sahota.
Right reply as yet.
Apologies.
It's no problem at all. No problem at all.
Yes.
Right, thank you. Thank you. No, I think I'll start another way. Actually, I think the contributions we had from Assembly Member Twycross and Assembly Member Eshalomi, very moving, very accurate, and does absolutely make the case as to why this is such an important subject. I myself was a parent who had to make that difficult decision as to whether or not to vaccinate my children. It was at a time, because I am so old and my children now have grown up, it was a time when MMR, all the rumours was at their height, and it really was a very, very difficult decision. And I spent time with the GP and my partner. We spent time with GP, and he gave us the reassurances that we need, and we did have our children treated. So it is really important, and that is why it is extremely regrettable, Dr. Sahota, that you have chosen to try and score yet again another cheap political point on this issue. It seems to be a theme today, and it's really regrettable, actually. So I've done a bit of homework, as it happens, on this subject. Of course, I don't have the medical experience of you, good doctor. But it's interesting that you chose 2015, because if we look at the rates of MMR take-up over the last 10 years, it is convenient that you've chosen 2015, because the rate of MMR uptake peaked in 2012 and has been steadily falling ever since 2012. But more importantly, the immunisation rate for MMR was far fewer than it is today. And from 2016 to 11, those rates are far, far fewer. From 2006 to 2011, far lower rates of take-up than we have today. So I don't know why you actually chose 2015. And I don't know why you've said that it's the government cuts that have been the cause of this, because it hasn't. I think what you said earlier was far more accurate, insofar as that we have a transient population here in London, and that is very much a cause of this issue. But otherwise, I'm afraid the figures completely contradict what you're claiming. And I think it would be a very good thing if we were to delete that inaccuracy in your motion and put forward a motion that we could all support, because how important it really is. Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Sakoto, summation.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I can understand why my colleagues on the other side find it embarrassing. In fact, they should be shameful of the fact that public health cuts have taken place. £66.8 million have been withdrawn from the public health budget of London. Year on, year out, the brunt of cuts that are taking place in the NHS is in the NHS. Rightly they're embarrassed, rightly ashamed of it, rightly they want to take away. That's why they want to do it. The words we used earlier on, that we had opposed a motion earlier on because we wanted to let the mayor off the hook. Well, I'll tell you, by them removing this paragraph, they want to let the government off the hook, and they can't do it. We are going to hold the government to account. We're going to hold this of the decimation of the NHS that's taking place, and also MMR is a very, very important thing. The countries that have done well, I agree with Andrew Boff, who says that there's no association between GDP spending and outcomes. I agree with that. But the countries that do well on vaccinations are the countries who prioritize public health campaigns. India, Bangladesh, developing countries know that the way to win those arguments, those health fights in their countries is by spending money on public health. When you cut public health, you stop informing people, you stop putting the preventive measures in. And that's why I won't accept this amendment, because the purpose of that is to hide their shame rather than be good for Londoners.
Thank you. Can I see those in favour of the motion in the name? Sorry. Can I see those in support of the amendment?
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for Chair.
Can I see those against the amendment?
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 against, Chair.
12 against. The amendment falls. Can I see those in favour of the amendment? Of the motion. It's just been too long a day for me. Can I see those in favour of the motion?
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Chair.
Can I see those against?
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against, Chair.
Right. The motion is carried. Okay. Is there an amendment to? Okay. So 6.6, motion in the name of Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you, Chair. I've always believed that the perfect transport system is one that makes your journey as boring as possible, as uneventful. The most boring transport policy is the best transport policy. It shouldn't be an effort. It shouldn't be a large production number to get from your front door to your place of work or to wherever to your destination. It shouldn't be an effort. And that should be the aim of transport policy for all passengers who use the transport system. The trouble is, we've had a situation, and it's sadly still the case, that our city's public transport network is simply not accessible enough at this moment in time for Londoners who have disabilities. And so therefore disabled passengers deserve not only the assistance they need, but also respect when they are trying to negotiate the transport network. I've talked to a number of disabled passengers and over the years. But all this, the concerns that were given to me over the years were crystallised in an article by the journalist James Moore in The Independent just a few weeks ago, where he outlined the nightmare of a journey that it was for him. And the nightmare was not that the staff themselves were not aware of the procedures of TfL with regard to dealing with helping disabled passengers. It was their inability to respect those his individual rights to have the most boring and uneventful journey possible. To the extent not only were many of his requests because he can use crutches and he can use a wheelchair, not only were his choices not respected as to which form of assistance he used respected, also the fact that he was holding up the journey was highlighted, in fact shouted down the platform, saying that there is an MIP holding up the train, and an MIP apparently is a mobility impaired person. Can you imagine the embarrassment that would be if you were the person on a train and highlighted as the reason the train was held up? Can you imagine how difficult it would be for you to have confidence in the transport network if that's the kind of experience that you're going to have? It's these poor experiences that disabled people have that lead people not to use the transport system. And I think that transport system should be available for all Londoners, irrespective of their disabilities. But the most important thing is that the staff, who are often very good, the TfL staff on the platform and in the transport network, should respect individuals as individuals and not just as an MIP, a difficulty to be dealt with. So that's what I'm asking for in this motion, and I do hope it will get the unanimous support of the Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member McCartney, to second.
Yes, thank you. I'm very pleased to second this, and I'm glad that Andrew has brought this forward today, because I too read the story that he refers to, and as he has stated, travelling across London if you have a disability is often very difficult, and one would not want to make it more difficult or indeed put anybody off trying again. And Andrew also made the point about the fact that our transport system, although accessibility is improving, it needs to go further. And I think this Mayor has accepted that and is doing what we can. And we have previously, I think, all called for further funding for government for those access for all bids for our local areas too. But I'm glad to support this motion, because I know of many examples of very good practice where TfL staff, and I think I've just referred to that, most do have excellent customer service and do take great care. But listening is also very important. And so I'm happy to second this motion, because if it is not already done in the training programme for staff, for drivers and staff, an explicit point or part to be made about how you do that, not just go to help and do the best you can, but to actually listen and actually do even better work when dealing with passengers who have disabilities would be important. So I'm very happy to support this.
Okay, thank you. Any speakers? No, can we then go to the vote? Oh, sorry. Assembly Member...
I won't take that.
No summation, yeah. So sorry. I apologise for missing out the summation. I'm not doing it willfully. Right. Can I then see those in favour of the motion?
That is
unanimous.
Unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Thank you. Right, and then we now move to motion 6.7, and the process has been clarified a little bit, but we'll go through it to make sure that it's formally sound. So can I call upon Assembly Member Russell to move her altered motion?
Sorry,
to move the altered motion?
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
So I'm bringing this motion today against a background of increasing concern among Londoners as more and more people become aware of glyphosate and its widespread use across our city as a weed killer. In November 2017, EU member states narrowly voted to relicense glyphosate for a further 5 years. Due to concerns over its human health and environmental impacts, the relicensing came with a condition that member states minimise the use in public spaces such as parks, playgrounds and gardens. Despite the EU decision, many countries remain very concerned that glyphosate is harming human health and are on their way to banning its use in urban areas. The list includes France, Germany, Italy and Austria. Much of the debate around glyphosate has focused on whether it causes cancer. Independent scientists from around the world largely agree that long-term exposure to glyphosate is harmful to human health. Advice from the World Health Organization, as well as a number of high-profile legal cases, have led people quite rightly to question its continued use in our streets, parks and on estates. Any potential carcinogenic effects linked to glyphosate exposure are obviously of particular concern to staff who carry out spraying as part of their weed control work. And perhaps the most important part of this motion is the need to protect these workers. As I say in the motion, the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham has already decided to stop using glyphosate, and prompted by concerns about human health, biodiversity and the leaching of chemicals into the soil, Hackney and Croydon are also currently exploring safer alternatives. Around the world, glyphosate use is banned or restricted in cities and provinces in around 30 countries. In Spain, it's banned in Madrid, Barcelona and Zaragoza. In Belgium, it's banned in Brussels. In Portugal, it's banned in all public spaces. In France, it's banned in many areas and is to be eliminated completely by 2021. In the USA, it's banned in many cities, including Los Angeles, Napa, Miami, Chicago, Minneapolis, Portland, Oregon, Austin, Texas. And in June, Germany's biggest user of glyphosate, the national rail company Deutsche Bahn, announced a ban of the chemical across its whole estate. I hope the Mayor will be receptive to this motion. Thanks to input from Assembly Member Cooper, the London Environment Strategy already includes a commitment to reduce the use of pesticides. Thousands of cities and towns around the world manage perfectly without pesticides, including major cities like Paris and Barcelona, so there is no reason why the same cannot happen in London. The motion calls for a working group to share best practice as boroughs work towards ceasing the spraying of glyphosate, and in the amended version I've added a rider that deals with the control of invasive species such as Japanese knotweed. In light of the mounting public and occupational health concerns, I urge you to support this motion and ask the Mayor to cease the spraying of glyphosate on GLA land and across the TfL estate, and to call on London boroughs to phase out its use in their weed control operations as soon as is practical. I move the motion.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder for the altered motion? You're reserving your right. Members, you do have a right to vote on this altered motion, but if you... No, I see no one, so then we'll move on, and I will call Assembly Member... Who's this motion?
Assembly Member Cooper, Chair.
Assembly Member Cooper to move her amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have made an amendment to this motion. Assembly Member Russell did refer to the fact that the environment strategy was amended after I picked up the issue of pesticides and herbicides with the mayoral team. So the final version of the strategy does actually include it. So I think it's a bit of a shame that the mover and the seconder of the motion, for whatever reason best known to themselves, didn't include that in the first place. So it's an amendment to include that. But the other thing that it does is it also talks about bringing forward an action plan and timetable for a major reduction to zero over time in the use of glyphosate on GLA land and the TfL estate, because the environment strategy is very clear that the Mayor wants to lead by example in this area. But we must be clear that when we're talking about TfL, that we are trackside is, you know, that's next to the tracks where trains are running. Both the underground trains when they're above ground, which they are on many lines, for example, the Central Line, but also obviously, you know, where we're running London Overground. And what we can't do is cease immediately and go to zero without actually ensuring that we're clearing in some way. So prioritising that tracksides are cleared using mechanical rather than chemical methods to guarantee the safety of the running of the trains. I've done some work with the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and Councillor Harcourt has been looking into a lot of alternatives, and I would commend them to other authorities. But the other area that we wanted to change was to suggest that the Mayor of London supports rather than takes over the work that the members of London councils are able to do on this. The Transport and Environment Committee, on which Councillor Harcourt sits, and representatives from Hackney and Croydon and all the London boroughs are very well capable, in fact they're at the LGA conference at the moment, of bringing together a working group for themselves and propagating the information between the boroughs so that they can all move forward together, not just with Hammersmith and Fulham in the lead, but other boroughs considering it as well, because we don't want to endanger passers-by, we don't want to endanger members of staff, but we also want to make sure that things that are being done properly so that people aren't tripping over, you know, that we implement other alternatives, including mechanical methods. We thought it was an oversight that that wasn't mentioned in the motion, so we've put that in, as well as the reference to the fact that it is already in the environment strategy. Thank you very much, Chair. I move the amendment.
Okay, can I have the second, Assembly Member Copley?
Formally, Chair.
Okay, so reserve. So can I open the debate with Assembly Member Bacon?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm in the slightly unusual position of agreeing with Assembly Member Cooper's amendment. I think it does improve the motion. I don't think it's intended to wreck it. I think the important point, for me anyway, and we will cautiously support this, the jury seems to be out on glyphosate. It's not an open and shut case. There are arguments on both sides. As Assembly Member Russell, thank you, mental block there, said when she was moving it, the World Health Organization study indicated that glyphosate is dangerous. There have been studies that have poured cold water on that. DEFRA have, the European Food Safety Authority, the German Federal Institute for Risk Assessment, US Environmental Protection Agency and the European Chemicals Agency have all produced studies which have said that they do not believe that glyphosate is a carcinogen that will be harmful to humans. But there is genuine concern in this. So I think that it is important actually to have a fairly moderate response, and that the bit about Assemblymember Cooper's amendment, which I like very much, is the action plan to gradually phase out glyphosate over time. Now that can go hand in hand with further studies that prove one way or the other whether the glyphosate is actually what people fear it might be. Also the fact that it acknowledges that London councils already have a working group looking at this, I think is a sensible and proportionate way to go. So we will be, as I say, cautiously supporting the amendment to this motion, and then when that passes, we'll support the main motion. Thank you.
Okay. Any other speakers in the debate? Assembly Member Pigeon.
I want to understand how the amendment fits with the altered motion, please, before I vote. Would you wish me to explain, Chair?
Yes, yes do.
Assemblymember Russell moved an altered motion. Nobody objected to Assemblymember Russell altering her motion, and it therefore becomes a substantive motion in front of the Assembly. Assemblymember Cooper has moved an amendment. If that were passed, it would be added on top of Assemblymember Russell's altered motion. So they would be cumulative, yeah.
Which fits, because I've spent quite a bit of time looking to ensure that no amendment negates original motions here this morning.
So Assemblymember Cooper's amendment is taken as referring to Assemblymember Russell's altered motion.
Okay? Lots of behind-the-scene action here this morning. Okay. Now, I'm totally lost. Where were we?
We're going to vote.
No, we weren't. We've got reserved.
Were there any additional speakers?
And that was it. It was additional speakers. No additional speakers. So we've got reserved rights. So Assemblymember Copley, when he's away from his phone.
No, I just moved it formally. I didn't reserve my right.
Did you not reserve your right? Okay.
I want to have lunch.
Well, who doesn't?
Assemblymember Berry also reserved.
Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to see a bit of cross-party cooperation breaking out in the Assembly, especially when it's got a bit complicated. But essentially, yes, we added a few words about spraying, an example of hot foam to our motion, and a note on a frequently asked question about invasive species. And the Labour amendment adds in what I think is a really useful bullet point, making a note on the environment strategy. It talks about setting a timetable, which I think is completely fair enough. Cease did not mean cease immediately in our original motion. All councils who've adopted this have made a plan over a number of years. I think even my motion to Camden Council was asking for a 3-year phase out. I think tracksides are potentially quite easy to deal with, but it's a good point. I don't know whether hot foam is mechanical, but I'm not going to quibble. So I think we're all good with that. The only bit in the motion, in the amendment, that I'm not so keen on is to switch the onus from taking leadership within the GLA and convening a working group to giving that to London councils, because I've noticed there's a little bit of there's cross-party cooperation here. In Camden Council, I've got the Conservatives and the Dems working with me on motions that we're putting to the Labour Council, and they're sort of, they're not sure yet. But in other places, sometimes the Labour... So it's not really a party issue. It's often a personal preference. It's often whether or not you believe one thing or another. So I'm not convinced by that part of the amendment. But yes, in general, this is good. In the European Parliament, Labour and the Greens, the groups that represent, that we're part of there in the European Parliament, we've worked together to expose the fact that Monsanto's lobbying work was cut and pasted into the German government's submission to the relicensing, which was an excellent bit of work. So it's really nice to see that we're all agreeing on this, and I think with the amendments we can all agree and get on with taking some leadership on this, because we really don't need glyphosate all over our track sides. We have a lot of land that we can protect from dangerous chemicals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Confirmation, Assembly Member Cooper.
I'm just glad to hear that the moves
If you're
of the motion...
summating, you have to stand.
I'm glad to hear that the moves of the motion are mostly in favour of the content. I was very pleased to hear that Assembly Member Bacon is happy with it as well, so I commend the amendment to everybody.
Okay, back to you, Assembly Member Resell, for your summation.
Of getting off to lunch, I summate.
Thank you. So can I see those in favour of the amendment?
I think that's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. So can I now see those in favour of the amended motion in front of you?
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous. Thank you so much. I love it when we are together on one page. And can I now go to item 7, and that's the date of the next meeting, and that will be held on the 18th of July. It's a Mayor's Question Time meeting. It'll be held here 10 a.m. in this chamber. Thank you all, members.
GLA